Game of Thrones, The King's Court Wizard ch 21-40. Chapter 21, The Tournament at Harrenhal. The stands covered both sides of the arena, men and women dressed extravagantly filled the seats. A large amount of voices hung in the air, making it impossible to understand anything. The commoners, who were on the ground, gathered in crowds, creating a large multitude around the entire tournament. Those who were tall at that moment could have a better view, but those who were short only lamented not being able to see the arena in its entirety. The arena of wet dark sand made the terrain more solid and flat. In the most important seats, covered by a luxuriously decorated ceiling, away from the sun and rain, were all the important nobles and court ministers. In the first row were the king and the two queens, with their sons and daughter, followed by the Lord Paramount of the Manor and Lord of Highgarden, Mace Tyrell, a fat man in green robes with the House Tyrell sigil embroidered on his chest. Besides Mace, there was an old woman with a harmless appearance next to him. A green and gold dress covered her small body, a white scarf covered her hair and surrounded her face, closing just below her chin, leaving only the woman's face visible. Of course, the protagonists of the tournament were the Prince of Dragonstone, Aegon Targaryen, and Margaery Tyrell, the flower of House Tyrell. The future couple was smiling, showing polite and elegant smiles. They looked like a beautiful couple. Margaery was beautiful with her thick, slightly curly brown hair and large brown eyes. She has a slender but feminine figure, with smooth, unblemished, pale skin and small breasts. She wore a slightly low-cut floral green dress, showing a little of her modest but undeniably attractive breasts. She displayed a shy and sweet smile on her red lips. Besides the members of House Tyrell, there was House Stark, who were all together, like a united pack. House Baratheon had only two members, Lady Shireen Baratheon and her knight, Ser Davos. There were also members of House Tully, Lord Edmure Tully and his wife, Lady Cersei Lannister, and the noble sons and daughters of the couple. Furthermore, there was a dwarf drinking next to Cersei. House Arryn was also present, but it wasn't Jon Arryn who came personally, but a young blonde man with blue eyes named Harold Harding, accompanied by 3 knights. House Martell had no one but the Queen herself, and House Greyjoy was not invited. Suddenly, when everyone was talking among themselves, Cadmus abruptly appeared next to the king with a loud crack. He took a step forward and sat on the king's left side, where there was no one. "I apologize for the delay, Your Grace, I was busy with my books." Rhaegar felt his heart stop for a moment and looked at the boy with a slightly accusatory look. He was sure Cadmus was taking revenge on him for being present when the truth was revealed to his mother. However, as he was in public, he was a generous king and ignored the boy's petty revenge. "I hope my enemies don't have this magic of suddenly appearing next to me," Rhaegar whispered to Cadmus, who smiled. "Don't worry, there is a spell to prevent that from happening. When we get to the Red Keep, I will cast that spell to cover the entire castle." Cadmus replied in a low tone that was impossible for others to hear. Rhaegar showed a satisfied look. This magic was truly dangerous. There would be no safe place in the world if someone had equal or similar magic. "Lord Peverell." Elia greeted the court mage with a sweet and gentle smile. "Cadmus." Lyanna greeted Cadmus with a cheerful smile. Cadmus looked at both queens and bowed with his hand on his chest in a purposefully exaggerated salute, earning laughs from both queens. After that, he winked at Gaemon, who was staring at him with a happy look, and then greeted all the members of the royal family, who seemed to be seeing his true appearance for the first time. Daenerys looked at the court mage and got lost in those beautiful, warm green eyes, exuding an almost mesmerizing kindness, yet containing an almost supernatural confidence, as if he could do anything. She was right, as Daenerys expected. Cadmus was young, but she didn't expect him to be so handsome. And she had to admit, she wanted those eyes to reflect only her and no one else. "Behave yourself, you wicked princess," Don't let him see your ugly and indecent side, the princess thought as she smiled politely at Cadmus and looked away from him. Rhaenys was more open, she winked provocatively at the court mage and smiled amicably, making Daenerys next to her look at her niece with a dissatisfied look. Cadmus didn't know what the dragon princess was thinking, but he didn't care. He didn't want to seem rude and didn't look at the princesses for too long. His gaze fell on the protagonist couple of this tournament and he couldn't help but show an amused smile. The first impression he had of the crown prince was that he was handsome. He wasn't surprised by this. After all, he was the son of Rhaegar and Elia, two beautiful people, but he was surprised to see the hostility in the prince's eyes towards him. The mage didn't understand why Aegon seemed so hostile towards him. Cadmus thought that the plans to depose Aegon had been leaked, but that was impossible. He hadn't even started. How could Aegon know about it? Although he was confused by Aegon's hostility, Cadmus didn't care. Aegon had no power at court, so he wasn't worried about anything, as the young prince presented no danger, either personally or politically. However, seeing Aegon ignore Margaery and talk cheerfully with the bride's twin brother, Loras Tyrell, Cadmus wanted to laugh and lament the fate of the Rose of House Tyrell. Her husband was more interested in her brother than in herself, which was a laughable and tragic thing at the same time. Should I prepare a potion for Aegon? I can make one that will make Margaery look like a man. Cadmus thought with an amused look. Who would this be, Your Grace? Olenna, seeing Cadmus and the king sitting so close to each other and talking like friends, asked with a smile on her lips. The Queen of Thorns' gaze was somewhat penetrating and strong. My new minister on the small council. Rhaegar replied calmly, but didn't go into detail. At the same time he was cautious with this sharp-tongued old woman. That's good news, one more lord to worry about our beautiful kingdom. Olenna's smile deepened. She looked at Cadmus and narrowed her eyes. The way he suddenly appeared is quite interesting, it even looks like a magic trick. Cadmus narrowed his eyes, he looked at the old woman with interest and asked with a smile. Do you want to see a magic trick, my lady? Surprise me, my lord. Olenna said with a provocative smile. Maybe I'll clap. Cadmus didn't care about the sarcastic comments and put his hands together. When he opened his hands, a cloud of green and red butterflies flew around, making everyone exclaim in surprise and some in shock. The women around were enchanted by the beautiful scene, especially Margaery, who saw the green and red butterflies as a symbol of her marriage. She looked at the handsome young man with green eyes with a look full of interest and a touch of gratitude. Olenna narrowed her eyes and looked at Cadmus with a solemn look. She knew how to recognize a charlatan when she saw one, but in front of the handsome young man, she felt that his smile was oppressive and those beautiful green eyes were frightening. It seemed that there was no secret that could be hidden from him. A mage, a true mage in the court of the Seven Kingdoms. Olenna could imagine the earthquake it would be when the news reached Old Town. However, looking at the king who was still smiling calmly, she knew that things had become more complicated. Did you like the magic, my lady? Cadmus asked with a smile, feeling satisfied for intimidating this scary old woman. Surprisingly. Olenna said with a smile as she slowly clapped her hands, the others followed and clapped together, everyone's eyes were focused on Cadmus, who simply laughed and accepted the applause without any modesty. This old woman is scary. Cadmus commented with a smile to Rhaegar, who nodded his head. She is a sharp-tongued old woman, but with great power in her hands. Others may think it's her son who rules House Tyrell, but it's Olenna herself. Rhaegar said with a smile, looking at Olenna, who was staring at him with a harmless smile on her lips. I love politics, this old woman will be a good adversary. Cadmus commented with a laugh, feeling that it was the right choice to come to Rhaegar's court. He would never be bored in this place. Rhaegar rolled his eyes and spoke, hearing the trumpet being played. The tournament has begun. The king stood up and began his speech. Chapter 22, The Tournament at Harrenhal. Today is a memorable day for me, as a father and as a king. My son will finally take the first step to becoming a true man, and that is a cause for great joy, Rhaegar declared. For a brief moment, silence took over the place, before being broken by enthusiastic applause and whistles. Rhaegar smiled. When he felt that the acclaim was sufficient, he slightly raised his hand. The noise gradually subsided, until it completely ceased, although the atmosphere remained vibrant and festive. I see that everyone is excited, and I share that enthusiasm. So many young knights ready to show the world their skills, proving that this new generation is the one we should trust when the years catch up to us, the king said in an inspiring tone. The young knights, many of them no older than 18, puffed out their chests with pride. There was a fierce determination in their eyes, as if they were willing to fight to the death to make the king's words come true. The king knows how to make these young knights fight for him. Tyrion brought the glass of wine to his lips and spoke with a laugh. What do you mean, uncle? Young and gentle Tommen asked with a confused look, but there was a look of admiration and childish joy as he looked at the king. Boring adult things, little lion. Tyrion showed an amused and provocative expression, making Tommen laugh and, like any child, lose focus and start looking around with extreme curiosity. Tyrion looked at Tommen and Myrcella with a gentle look, but this gentleness soon disappeared when he felt his sister's look of disgust and coldness. Don't soil my children's minds with your strange thoughts, Tyrion. Cersei commented in a lower tone, as if she was afraid the children would hear. Tyrion just shrugged and drank wine with a casual expression. He was already used to it, so he simply ignored it. However, looking at Cersei next to him, Tyrion showed an expression of sarcasm, especially seeing Cersei's envious look at the Targaryen king's two queens. He knew more than anyone how much Cersei wanted that position, how much she wanted to be the center of attention, how much she wanted her sons and daughter to have the king's silver blonde hair and purple eyes. However, what Cersei got was not a handsome, powerful, and intelligent dragon, but a shy fish as a husband and a mediocre man in every sense of the word, who didn't even know how to handle a bow with precision. Looking at Edmure Tully, who even adored the ground Cersei walked on, Tyrion felt a little sorry for the man. If betrayals could be seen as a bull's horns, Edmure wouldn't be able to lift his head with so many horns on his head. Suddenly, Tyrion felt a gaze on him and raised his head, where he saw a young man with black hair like a raven's feathers and a pair of emerald green eyes. Seeing him smile and nod his head, Tyrion was surprised because there was no disgust or any negative feeling towards him, which was rare. Tyrion toasted towards the young man, who returned the gesture with an amused smile. The dwarf couldn't help but think that they could be friends. The tournament will begin. With Rhaegar's words, the herald blew the horn once more. The king sat down and drank some water, feeling his throat dry after a speech. Your Grace knows very well how to inspire loyalty, and even a certain fanaticism in these young knights, Cadmus commented with a contained laugh, observing the still beardless faces, full of pride and ready to die in the name of glory and fame. You should be like them. However, you look more like an old man, without youth or naivete, Rhaegar replied, also laughing. In his eyes, Cadmus was a strange figure, a young man who behaved like a cunning old man, without the impulsiveness or the eagerness to prove his worth to the world, traits so common in young people, especially men. Just as a knight sharpens his own sword, I sharpen my mind with knowledge, Cadmus replied with a smile. This is quite useful for not falling into the manipulation of old men who like to send young people to kill each other on battlefields. Rhaegar rolled his eyes, but couldn't deny the truth in his words. All the knights approached with plate armor, shields, and swords. The herald announced the most important ones with a loud and lively voice. Arthur of House Dane, member of the King's Guard and Sword of the Morning. The first name made the audience explode in applause, some women even fainted seeing the white and gleaming armor of the legendary King's Guard knight. In this world, there was no young man who didn't long to be Arthur Dane and there was no man who didn't admire Arthur Dane. The knight was so legendary that his name alone could make 1,000 knights not take a step forward. That was Arthur Dane of the King's Guard. Although the next names were not as legendary as Arthur, they still made the audience applaud and shout loudly. Sir Brynden of House Tully, the Blackfish. Sir Jaime of House Lannister, the Golden Lion. John Umber, Great John. More and more names were called, but a silence hung in the air when the next name was announced by the herald. Prince Macar of House Targaryen, the Black Dragon. Wearing black armor with dragon features on his chest plate and helmet, the 14-year-old prince entered the arena with a black shield with the House Targaryen sigil. The three-headed red dragon looked especially striking at that moment. Prince Macar! Prince Macar! Prince Macar! Cadmus couldn't help but click his tongue in admiration at the audience's admiration for the young prince. In comparison, Aegon didn't even have 1% of the boy's popularity, which could be seen by the thunderous sounds of the people. Nobles and commoners were applauding with an intensity that seemed to shake the place. After all, unlike other participants, this was a prince. Even if others were famous, in the end, status still spoke louder in the eyes of nobles and commoners. It's a shame the crown prince won't participate in the combat. A duel between princes would be interesting. Cadmus commented while also clapping. He spoke a little loudly, so Prince Aegon's face twitched slightly. My son is not good with a sword, Cadmus. Elia spoke in a sweet and gentle tone, wanting to inform Cadmus of Aegon's lack of talent with the sword. Cadmus couldn't help but twitch his lips hearing the queen's words. He certainly was good at handling other men's swords. However, her words, which were not intended to hurt anyone, made Aegon clench his fists tightly as he looked at Macar on the battlefield with a look full of dissatisfaction and anger. It was his day, the day he should be the center of attention, but his brother, as always, had to interfere and steal everything from him. His mother's words echoed in his mind again, making him feel like an arrow had hit his heart. Not even his mother had confidence in him, which left him full of anger, helplessness, and mainly resentment. Thank you for explaining, my queen. Cadmus looked gratefully at the queen and smiled, then looked at Aegon with a playful look. He couldn't help but feel a little sorry for the boy. Although he wasn't a psychologist, he could imagine what Aegon was feeling and thinking at that moment. After all, having a talented brother was one of the most terrible torments a brother could have. Envy, resentment, and anger could work wonders in the minds of teenagers, especially in Aegon, who was the crown prince, but was always surpassed by his younger brother. So, Aegon's mentality was quite predictable in Cadmus's eyes. Your Grace seems to put a lot of pressure on Aegon. Cadmus commented with a smile, looking at Rhaegar with an amused look. He's going to be king. If he can't even overcome this, how can he rule? Rhaegar spoke in a calm tone. As an intelligent man, he knew he was creating a rivalry between the brothers. After all, he always praised Macar and criticized Aegon, but he felt he was doing the right thing. Only when Aegon felt pressure could he want to be better than his brother. Unfortunately, it seems that this education was not having the effect he expected. Aegon seemed further and further away from what he expected and Macar closer and closer to what he really wanted. Chapter 23, The Tournament at Harrenhal. Cadmus smiled at the king, but didn't say what he was thinking. Rhaegar might be thinking he was doing the right thing, but in his eyes, the man was creating a possible civil war within House Targaryen, which others could use to make the kingdom even more fragile than it was. Could Prince Macar try to rebel? Not at the moment, but with the right flatterers and ambition inflamed by anger and resentment, things could turn into something extremely bad in the future. Cadmus didn't think things would be peaceful. Cadmus stopped thinking and watched the melee combat with curiosity and interest. All the knights were together in the arena, everyone against everyone. It was a chaotic fight with men fighting and defending with ferocity. Of course, because of the plate armor, it was extremely difficult to injure the opponent, but experienced warriors tried to pierce the armor joints while the young ones tried to cut the enemy's armor with their swords. The young knights, when they saw that it wasn't working, resolved things by throwing the opponent to the ground and starting a fist fight. The smart ones drew daggers and tried to attack the exposed parts of the opponent's armor. "This is brutal," Cadmus commented upon seeing a young knight be stabbed with a dagger that pierced his neck. The 18 or 17-year-old boy died drowning in his own blood. It was simply brutal and bloody. "Tournaments are like that. I didn't want Makar to participate, but the boy is more stubborn than an untamed horse," Rhaegar said with a sigh. There was a feeling of concern in his eyes. After all, he knew what tournaments were like and how many died. Another young man had just died, but the opponent didn't leave unscathed, as there was a dagger in the armor joint in the armpit region. He staggered before fainting. Some squires quickly pulled him out of the arena. "I presume that most of these knights are second sons of noble houses?" Cadmus asked in a calm tone. "What a waste of people. They are the height of the world's militarism. They are trained from childhood in war tactics and know how to ride a horse." "Do you think I wanted this to happen?" Rhaegar asked in an imposing tone. "These second sons want fame, honor, and glory, but what they want most is lands and titles. They don't want to join my army and prefer to help their own noble houses." Moving his wand to create a silence field around them, a spell created by Snape, Cadmus looked at the king and said calmly, "I've cast a spell over us. Even if we shout, no one will hear anything." Rhaegar showed a surprised look and knew that Cadmus wanted to say something serious. "Centralize the king's power, your grace," Cadmus said in a calm tone. "Take away the nobles' right to create and change laws within their own territory. Take away their right to create an army, create schools, and promote commoners to important positions. There are many ways to centralize power." Rhaegar was silent for a moment, before finally speaking. "My grandfather, Aegon V, tried to make reforms, giving a little power to the commoners. The following month, all the nobles were in King's Landing gently asking the king to reconsider. In the end, the reforms completely failed. The House Targaryen of the age of Jaehaerys I no longer exists." Of course, Rhaegar wanted to make reforms and decrease the power of the nobles, especially after Robert's rebellion, mainly at this moment, where great noble houses no longer accepted his orders. He saw how much power the nobles had, but he had no way to change that. Even if it were only in the crown lands, he had no way to do it, or the support he had would completely disappear. In the end, a Targaryen without a dragon is not strong enough to subdue everyone. Rhaegar said with a tone full of helplessness, revealing thoughts he hadn't even spoken to his own wives or anyone. "And if your grace had a dragon, would you burn your enemies, or would you be like Jaehaerys I, wanting a status quo instead of a long war to pacify everything?" Cadmus asked in a solemn tone and continued speaking. "If Jaehaerys had burned Old Town, burned the enemies, burned the traitors, even if everything was fragmented, full of death and ashes, over time, everything would heal and a continent clean of 90% of the rebels would have disappeared. House Targaryen could create as many laws as they wanted and would have control over the entire continent." Rhaegar showed a cold expression when he heard Cadmus's words. He felt a deep envy of Jaehaerys, who had House Targaryen at its peak. If he were in the old king's place, he would have done what Cadmus had just said. And Jaehaerys would have done the same if he knew the current situation House Targaryen was in. A fragmented world of House Targaryen was better than an intact world of some other great noble house. "Unfortunately, I don't have a dragon," Rhaegar said, sighing. There was a deep helplessness in his voice. Cadmus didn't answer, but there was a satisfied smile on his lips. Rhaegar was more determined than he expected. This was good. The world needed a determined and cruel king in the future, not a pacifist and naive king. While the two were talking, the fight in the arena continued. Makar used his shield to defend against the enemy's sword. When he blocked the attack, he advanced towards the opponent, knocking him to the ground. The young prince wasted no time and drew his dagger, plunging it without any hesitation into the enemy's neck. The prince could see the knight's eyes widen. The fear and terror in his gaze made Makar seriously wonder why this tournament was happening. To die was to never have hope, to die was to never have the chance to see those he loved again. Was dying for glory as important as he expected? Makar withdrew the dagger from the enemy's neck and breathed heavily. Just one battle left him out of energy. He finally understood why Arthur always said to make the minimum effort possible in a battle, especially in a war. Humans didn't have infinite energy, and when two men fought, they used all their strength to kill the enemy, so it was very common to get tired in just one exchange of blows. People who kill 3 or 5 men on the battlefield were the elite of the elite, a man who could fight against a crowd of 20 unarmed men without any problem. Looking around, Makar saw Arthur Dane not far from him. The legendary swordsman was calm and didn't even look like he had fought. Which was not possible, given the 5 men lying on the ground around him. None were dead, as they gave up when they were defeated. Makar felt sincere admiration in his eyes. He was truly worthy of the best swordsman Westeros had ever seen. However, he noticed that Arthur was not looking at him, but at the man wearing golden and red armor, lions on both shoulders. Jaime Lannister. Makar recognized the man in an instant. Sir Arthur. Jaime greeted the man who taught him to train when he was still a king's guard. There was bitterness in his voice. It's been a while, Kingslayer. Arthur said in a calm tone. His blue, almost purple eyes stared at Jaime with an indifferent look. Jaime's jaw clenched upon hearing his words, but he relaxed again. The king dismissed me, he broke my vows. He said with a tone full of bitterness and pain. Being the first man to be expelled from the king's guard would be a stain he would carry for eternity. Tywin wanted peace, and for that, he asked for you in exchange for peace. Arthur said in a calm tone. He looked directly into Jaime's eyes and continued. But that doesn't change the fact that you wanted to kill King Aerys. You know what he wanted to do. Jaime almost growled when he mentioned it. I would rather die than try to kill the man I promised to protect with my life. Arthur said in a calm tone. Even being mad, he trusted us more than anyone in this world, but you still tried to kill him. There were other ways to stop him, but you chose to raise your sword to the man you swore to protect. He didn't say that Jaime was wrong to stop the king, he said that Jaime was wrong to try to kill the king. Aerys was a weak and powerless old man. Jaime could have tried to arrest him and wait for the arrival of Prince Rhaegar. But instead, he tried to kill Aerys. If it weren't for the Lord Commander of the King's Guard arriving in time, the king would be dead and Jaime would be called Kingslayer from that day on. Jaime smiled bitterly. He was young and thought he was doing everything for the kingdom, but seeing it now, Arthur was right. He could have locked the king in one of the rooms and waited for reinforcements or even the prince. I have no excuses for that, let's fight. Jaime said in a calm tone. He wielded his sword with both hands and entered a combat stance. Arthur didn't seem surprised and drew his sword. The legendary sword Dawn, said to be made from a star, came out of the scabbard with a milky golden glow. Chapter 24, The Tournament at Harrenhal. Everyone's eyes were focused on two people. Arthur Dane and Jaime Lannister. Clang. 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 The clash of both swords seemed particularly clear in the silent environment. Everyone was afraid to even breathe louder for fear of disturbing the two men. Arthur was fast, deadly, and intensely quick. Even wielding a long sword, his blows were nothing more than a fleeting flash in the air. Jaime, on the other hand, used the sword as if it were an extension of his arm. His strength was greater than Arthur's, but being larger and more muscular, he was slower than his opponent, which made him feel extremely pressured by Arthur's extremely fast attacks. The Golden Lion only managed to see the attacks before blocking them at the last moment. If Jaime were not an experienced warrior, he would have been defeated a long time ago. Arthur Dane was fast, too fast, even for someone of Jaime's level. With eyes as sharp as a hawk's, Arthur advanced mercilessly, pushing Jaime to the limit. His sword moved faster and faster, the milky glow of dawn cutting through the air like a shooting star, hitting the enemy blade with absolute precision. Unlike dawn, Jaime's sword was terribly battered, resembling the teeth of a toothless old man, full of flaws along the forged steel blade. Since the beginning of the combat, Jaime had already started the duel at a disadvantage. Arthur wielded Dawn, a legendary sword with more than 10,000 years of existence, which had never lost its edge or suffered any damage, living proof of how extraordinary the weapon was. Jaime's blade, in turn, although resistant and well forged, was nothing more than a sharper and more durable stick compared to Dawn. Forcing every muscle in his body to the extreme, Arthur swung his arm and, at that moment, had the sensation of delivering the fastest blow of his entire life. In the eyes of those present, it was just a sudden flash of light in the air, followed by a dry and violent crash that echoed across the battlefield. Jaime's sword broke in two while the knight felt his arm numb, as if he had been hit by a hammer. Half of the blade spun in the air and fell to the ground, burying its tip in the earth. Under his helmet, Jaime was breathing heavily. He looked at Arthur before him with admiration, there was no resentment in his eyes. He never thought he could defeat Arthur, who was at his peak at that moment. However, he felt that he was getting closer and closer to his former comrade in arms, which brought a smile to his lips. "I surrender." As soon as Jaime spoke, Arthur, who was about to continue, stopped and looked deeply at Jaime, then turned and left in search of another worthy opponent. Watching his back, Jaime opened his mouth to say something, but the words were stuck on his lips. He wanted to talk to Arthur, drink with him like when he joined the King's Guard at 15, but he remembered that he was no longer a member of the King's Guard. Arthur didn't know what Jaime was thinking and didn't care. A traitor and oath-breaker was not worthy of his concern. Arthur's eyes found the figure of Prince Macar facing a tall and muscular knight. The young prince was losing, and he himself didn't see how the prince could win. What naturally happened the next moment, the prince's shield broke with the opponent's sword blow, and Macar lost his balance, falling to the ground. Although the armor was heavy, it was extremely agile and mobile, so the prince tried to get up quickly, but the experienced warrior he was facing did not allow this, placing a sword at the prince's neck. When Arthur was about to move, to save the prince from any accident, he sighed with relief when he heard Macar's voice. "I surrender." Arthur saw the knight stop attacking and move away in search of another opponent. Looking back at the prince, still on the ground, there was a touch of appreciation in the Kingsguard's gaze. Knowing how to recognize oneself was a quality that few knights had the chance to experience in life, as they died in battle before they could develop that kind of self-recognition. Fighting a losing battle was foolish. Approaching, Arthur asked with a calm tone. "How does it feel to lose?" "I feel like trash, but I know it was impossible to defeat an adult and veteran knight. I was not only weaker than him, but also slower. Even though I was more agile, that advantage was not enough to guarantee victory." Macar removed his helmet as he spoke, displaying an open and sunny smile. The prince's black hair was especially dark, soaked with sweat and stuck to his skin. His deep purple eyes, so similar to the king's, shone brighter than ever. "You will be a great knight in the future, but this is not your moment yet," Arthur said with a serene smile, taking care not to undermine the young prince's confidence. "Keep that feeling and train even harder." Macar was too young. Although he was a prodigy, he was still just a teenager, with a body still forming and insufficient strength. Facing adult, experienced, and fully developed knights was simply impossible. Macar nodded his head and looked towards the special seats, where he looked at his father with a big smile as he got up from the ground. He waved to the crowd and left the arena with the broken shield in his hands. His gait was somewhat limping and his arm was retracted, probably fractured, but he continued to show a big smile, feeling satisfied and full of a sense of accomplishment. "Do you think he will be the second Dragon Knight?" Rhaegar asked Cadmus, who was watching everything with an expression full of satisfaction. Apparently, Cadmus was enjoying watching the brutal fight before him. If he focuses on training, abandoning all ambition and joining the king's guard, he will be another Aemon the Dragon Knight. Cadmus said with a smile. However, not all men can abandon everything and swear a life of training and strength. Rhaegar knew this, but he wanted a different opinion. However, just the fact that Macar had this potential showed that his son was extraordinary. He would never let Macar abdicate all titles and possessions to join the king's guard. In this world where death was common, the second in line of succession could not simply disappear like that. Cadmus looked at the king's thoughtful face and shook his head. He knew that Rhaegar was thinking about many things, especially regarding the succession of the kingdom. Which, honestly, was a more than valid concern for a king. Elia, did you see how good Macar was in battle? He defeated 2 knights and lost in the 3rd, much better than these young knights. Lyanna said with a big smile on her lips. There was a mixture of tenderness and pride in her eyes. Obviously a mother proud of her own son. As someone who disguised herself as a man to enter the tourney of Harrenhal, the previous one that was happening at that moment, she was naturally a strong and experienced warrior, defeating some strong men at the time. She could see that Macar only lost because he was not an adult. If he were, he probably would have been among the top 5. Yes, he was amazing. When he gets older, he will be a great knight. Elia was also proud of Macar. She and Lyanna raised their sons and daughters together. She considered Macar as her son, just as Lyanna also considered her son and daughter as her own. However, he looks hurt. Elia said with a worried look on her face. This was not the first tournament she had watched. She knew better than anyone how brutal these battles were. Macar's actions before leaving the battlefield indicated that he was injured. Finally noticing this, Lyanna looked at Cadmus and asked with a quick tone. Cadmus, do you have any more of those potions? Hearing the queen's words, Cadmus finally saw his business opportunity arriving. He looked at the queen and spoke with a tone full of confidence. I prepared some potions for any accident. As long as he is not dead, I can heal him in less than an hour. Chapter 25, The Tournament at Harrenhal. Under the surprised eyes of everyone, Cadmus seemed to be sucked in by an invisible force and, with a loud crack in the air, disappeared before them all. Rhaegar wore a calm expression, but he was still filled with admiration for the magic. Remembering that House Targaryen should have its own blood and fire mages, Rhaegar felt a pang in his heart. 5,000 years of magical heritage simply vanished like that. He wanted to go back in time and slap every Targaryen king before him. Especially Jaehaerys I, the old king. While the king was brooding over his arrogant ancestors, Olenna spoke once more. Your new minister is interesting, your majesty. Rhaegar put aside his bitter thoughts and looked at Olenna with a calm gaze. He understood the implications in the Queen of Thorns' words. What can I say? I quite like having interesting people around me. Interesting people are always the most pleasant. They can always surprise you at the best times. Olenna said with an ever-deepening smile. She did not deny Rhaegar's words. It was better to have useful people by your side than useless ones. However, Rhaegar's choice was also quite bold. When Old Town found out, or rather, when the High Septon found out, things would get out of control. The king narrowed his eyes and continued to smile, as if placing a mage in his court was something normal and totally accepted by the people and the church. However, remembering the bloody and eternal feud between House Targaryen and the Faith of the Seven, Rhaegar did not care at all. Seeing the king in that manner, Olenna raised her small wine glass to her lips and narrowed her eyes. The calmer the king was, the more she knew something was very wrong. The act of having a mage in court was simple. It was simply throwing a large stone into an already turbulent, shark-filled lake. The king not showing concern only showed that he was ready to face all the consequences. Olenna raised her head and looked directly into the king's eyes, which stared back at her with a cold gaze, making her feel a shiver down her spine. For the first time, she saw what a truly strong king was like. not a madman like Ares or a weakling like Jaehaerys too. The Queen of Thorns did not feel sad about marrying her granddaughter to the son of a man like this, on the contrary, she felt they had won this war. Only a king who was determined to kill his enemies could pull Westeros out of this tension that had lasted for almost 2 decades. Elia and Lyanna, who were beside Rhaegar, also looked at Olenna, who was talking to her husband, with smiles. Although they seemed sweet, cheerful, and elegant, they were neither foolish nor naive. The queen must control the feminine part of the court, and believe me, although women did not have as much power as their husbands or men, they were by no means simple to deal with, especially the old women in court. They knew better than anyone what would happen in the court when Cadmus's reputation appeared. It would be a madness that they were already trying to mitigate by telling some stories of mages using magic for fun things. Elia held Rhaegar's hand, and Lyanna held Elia's hand. The three showed calm expressions, but there was a silent feeling of companionship between them. In the end, they would face what was coming together and without any fear. Rhaegar felt this through their hands and couldn't help but smile. He thanked any deity for giving him 2 wonderful women in such troubled times. On the other side, in the tents, Cadmus appeared with a crack in the air and looked at the dozens of wounded in beds, being helped by men wearing simple, humble brown robes. They were maesters, all versed in the art of healing. Of course, their healing was to give a simple treatment of bandaging the wound with a cloth and milk of the poppy for any pain. Cadmus couldn't help but lament that this world hadn't advanced even in 8,000 years of history. It was as if they were stuck in the age right after they stopped being hunters and gatherers. Putting those thoughts aside, Cadmus quickly located the prince and walked up to him. The prince was lying down while 3 maesters helped him with everything he needed. "Hello, my prince, I am Cadmus Peverell, your father's court mage," Cadmus said with a smile and continued. "I was tasked by 2 worried mothers to heal their son." Macar was surprised by the words of the young man before him and smiled, remembering Gamon and Rhaegar's conversation at dinner. "Thank you for your help, Lord Peverell." Looking at the maesters, who were completely paralyzed and shocked by Cadmus's words, Macar waved his hand and sent them all away. Turning back to Cadmus, he saw the mage take 2 vials from the small pouch he carried, always hidden by the green cloak. "These are 2 potions, one for vitality and the other to repair any bone damage." Cadmus presented the potions with a smile. Macar did not hesitate, but the maesters who were not far away had furious expressions. Regardless of the prince's previous orders, they approached like warriors ready to start a great battle. "My prince, do not drink that, there are no potions and elixirs, they are all rumors and people's imagination." The oldest of the 3 maesters spoke in a voice loud enough for everyone in the tent to hear. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked confused about what was happening. Macar frowned. Cadmus did not come on his own, it was Elia and Lyanna who asked him to come. He did not trust Cadmus, but he trusted his 2 mothers. "Enough," Macar said with a voice full of dissatisfaction. "My mother sent Lord Peverell. The queen has been deceived by this charlatan, your highness." The second of the 3 maesters spoke in a hurried tone. He could not believe this was happening. How could they let the prince drink something so unknown and dangerous? Cadmus frowned. He looked at the 3 maesters before him and spoke in a calm but slightly threatening tone. "You better shut up, or I will do it for you." Being called a charlatan really offended him quite a bit. "Do you think I'm afraid of you? You are nothing but a fraud, an alchemist, and that kind of thing doesn't exist. They are just inventions of men with rotten souls like you who sell ideas to powerful noble houses." The oldest of the maesters present spoke with a tone full of arrogance, sarcasm, and contempt towards Cadmus. "Silence." Cadmus simply conjured the spell with his own hands, without needing a wand. The next moment, the men tried to speak, but no sound came out of their mouths. Naturally, they panicked as they furiously pointed at Cadmus. "Excuse me, I can't hear you, can you repeat that?" Cadmus showed an innocent expression and asked confusedly, however, the smile on his face revealed his true feelings. Poor fellows, they were born mute. Makar's eyes shone, seeing magic for the first time. Although he knew it was true because of his father, seeing magic was a completely different thing from just hearing about it. Looking at the two potions, Makar removed the corks and drank both potions in sequence. He didn't feel anything in the first 5 seconds, but soon began to feel a warm sensation run through every part of his body. The pain in his arm, which was extremely strong before, was now quickly disappearing. He was sure he had fractured a bone, as this was the arm he used his shield with, which was destroyed in the fight with the third knight he fought. However, Makar moved his arm and felt no pain, as if it were completely healed. Besides his arm, Makar felt healthier than ever, the extreme fatigue from the battle completely disappeared. He felt he could fight 100 more rounds without getting tired again. This left him completely shocked. "Thank you, Lord Peverell, I am completely healed." Getting out of bed, Makar spoke in a grateful tone while looking at Cadmus with curiosity. Seeing Makar getting out of bed as if he had never been injured made the surrounding knights' eyes widen. Not only them, all the maesters also widened their eyes. Previously, they had seen the state of Makar's arm, it was swollen and purple, looking like it was about to burst, but now, seeing his completely healed white arm, it made these knights look at Cadmus with an increasingly warm gaze, as if they were looking at a beautiful naked woman. Seeing this, Cadmus felt a shiver and felt that he had underestimated the power of the potion he had made. Chapter 26, Danger Lurking in the Surroundings. If there was one thing Cadmus never changed, whether in this life or the last, it was that he was a staunch capitalist. Before the eyes of the nobles, the price he had previously set increased enormously. It wasn't a 10-fold or 100-fold increase, but simply more. Originally, he was going to sell each potion for 100 gold dragons, but now, he increased it to 1,000 without any hesitation. There was no governmental body to control the price of things, so he unleashed his greed without any hesitation. In the future, Cadmus even felt he would increase the price even more, especially by controlling the quantity of potions, increasing their rarity and price. It was an evil thing, but they were nobles. If there was one thing they had, it was money, at least the nobles of the south. The nobles of the north, apart from House Manderley, the other houses were poor, even House Stark was poor. Makar, seeing the nobles' looks, understood and began to help Cadmus, who accepted the help with a satisfied smile. By the end of the sale, Cadmus had earned about 47,000 gold dragons. Although the price was expensive, some even bought 3 vials of potion, which made Cadmus understand that health has always been and always will be an extremely lucrative thing. Especially for rich people, who wanted to live longer than anyone else in the world. Cadmus wanted to laugh when he saw the amount of money. He made these potions with extremely cheap and common raw materials, meaning that with a cost of about 50 gold coins, he profited 47,000 gold dragons, a 94,000% profit. Looking at Makar, Cadmus gave the prince 1,000 gold coins with a smile. "Thank you for the help, my prince." Makar's eyes lit up when he saw how much Cadmus had given. Even being a prince, he didn't have money, his father gave him everything, so he never needed money. So, seeing such a large amount of money was quite pleasant. Makar did not show modesty and accepted without any hesitation. Of course, 1,000 coins was not a light amount, so he waved to some squires and whispered something to them before turning to Cadmus and thanking him. "Thank you, Lord Peverell." Cadmus just nodded and with a wave of his hand, the bags containing 46,000 gold dragons flew into his pouch. Everyone around watched with admiration, fear, but mainly admiration. "Your mother is waiting, please hold my arm," Cadmus said with a mischievous smile. Before operating with the prince, Cadmus looked at all the maesters around with a look of disdain and simply operated away. Makar looked confused, but still held Cadmus's arm, but the next moment, the worst experience of his life happened. Makar felt Cadmus's arm twist away from him and redouble its grip, then everything went black. He felt his body being pressed in all directions, he couldn't breathe, there were iron bars squeezing his chest, his eyes were being forced to turn inward, his eardrums were being pushed deeper into his skull. The next moment, Makar felt the firm ground again under his feet and desperately breathed air into his lungs. Looking around, he found himself in the exclusive stands, where he saw his father, his two mothers, and other members of House Targaryen, as well as those of the other great noble houses. "Are you all right, dear?" Lyanna asked with a worried expression upon seeing Makar's pale face. She didn't care how or why Cadmus and her son suddenly appeared, she was simply worried about her son's condition. "I'm fine, it's just that Lord Peverell's method of travel is quite uncomfortable." Showing a smile, Makar explained with a touch of uncertainty and helplessness. "You're good, my prince, most people vomit after operating for the first time," Cadmus said with a smile, observing the young prince, who was still pale and nauseous. He knew exactly what Makar was going through, so he wasn't surprised at all, although he wanted to see the prince vomit. Hearing his words, Makar naturally knew that Cadmus wanted to provoke him from the start. He couldn't help but think that the mage was truly dangerous and had a simply too playful mentality. Rhaegar looked at Cadmus and ignored him. He was already getting familiar with Cadmus. The boy was quite cheerful, playful, but could be serious in delicate moments that required solemnity. "You did well, Makar, you honored our house." Rhaegar looked at his son and said in a gentle tone, "I'm sure at the next tournament I will knight you." Makar showed a happy expression. Like any son, making his father proud was a very good feeling. All the hard work, sweat, and tears shed in his training were worth it at this moment. This made him happy and proud of himself. He looked at Aegon and showed a confused expression. Instead of his brother being happy for him, Aegon seemed to be looking at a complete stranger with indifference, which genuinely confused him. But he put it aside, thinking that Aegon was trying to show a pose worthy of a Targaryen prince. Cadmus didn't care and looked at the arena again. There weren't many people, those who were still standing were the elite of the elite. However, the winner of the battle was the one who had defeated the most enemies, which was naturally Arthur Dayne. The man was a monster in human skin. Whether it was reflexes, stamina, or strength, he seemed more like a witcher than a common human. "Are you sure Sir Arthur didn't go through the trial of the grasses?" Cadmus asked the king curiously. After all, Arthur didn't seem very human. "Some people are simply born to fight." Rhaegar spoke calmly, his eyes looking at Arthur with a smile. Although they were king and king's guard, they were friends who fought side by side in countless situations. "It seems they've stopped," Cadmus commented, seeing that no one was moving anymore, as if they were ready to end the first phase of the tournament. "First place is already decided, there's not much to do," Rhaegar said with a smile. "The next thing is the archery tournament, then the main event, the jousting. How much does the first place winner get in all the tournaments?" Cadmus asked curiously. He was genuinely interested. Seeing a medieval tournament was quite an experience, although he found it a bit too brutal. "It depends a lot, but I put 10,000 gold dragons for each first place, besides, obviously, a knighthood for the winners," Rhaegar replied while keeping his eyes on the arena. He could put a bigger prize, but he thought it wouldn't look good, especially with his expenses with the army. Having an army of 40,000 men was quite draining for the royal coffers. If it weren't for the help to House Tyrell in the wedding, he wouldn't even have come to Harrenhal and would have preferred the betrothal at the Red Keep. "I will congratulate the top 10," Rhaegar said with a smile. Perhaps other kings wouldn't do this, but he liked to show respect to the great warriors of the tournament. It not only flattered them but also inspired loyalty. Before leaving, Rhaegar spoke with a smile. "The tournament will have a break to organize the next event. Take the opportunity to mingle in the court. Everyone is very curious about you." Cadmus let out a laugh hearing this and showed no surprise. Only a blind and foolish person wouldn't be curious about a mage and magic. The mysterious, although it caused fear, also aroused curiosity and fascination in people. As Rhaegar said, everyone was more relaxed with the tournament break for the next event. The maids and servants served wine and food to the nobles, making the situation more welcoming and pleasant for a conversation. Cadmus brought the cup to his lips and drank the sweet wine, although he thought it was a very sweet wine for his taste, but it was much better than the wine from the taverns and hotels. Suddenly, Cadmus's expression changed drastically. He felt a slight magical energy lingering in the air. Putting the wine aside, he began to observe the surroundings carefully. There were people everywhere, talking to each other, and the collective buzz made it almost impossible to distinguish any isolated sound. After a careful search, Cadmus's emerald green eyes landed on a servant circulating among the guests with a silver tray. He maintained a cordial smile on his lips and a respectful look while serving those around him. Cadmus realized that the man was gradually approaching the personal circle of the two queens, where other ladies were also present, especially the bride, Margaery, and her grandmother, Lady Olenna. Without any hesitation, Cadmus approached and appeared next to the queen, causing the women around to scream, startled. "What happened, Cadmus?" Lyanna was also startled by the sudden appearance. However, noticing the cautious look on his face, the queen's expression became serious, and she instinctively placed herself in front of Elia, protecting her. "Assassins," Cadmus said in a calm tone, keeping his gaze fixed on the disguised aggressor, who was using some kind of magic. He was not a true magic user, as he hadn't even bothered to hide his own magical aura. Upon hearing Cadmus's words, the expressions of the women around changed drastically. Chapter 27, Danger Lurking in the Surroundings. The assassin, seeing that his targets were looking at him with caution and fear, continued to smile. Throwing the tray into the middle of the women nearby, causing screams of fear and shouts, the assassin drew 2 daggers and advanced extremely fast. The distance of 5 meters was covered in an instant. Reaching the queen, he ignored the handsome, thin-looking boy and turned the dagger towards Lyanna's neck. Obviously, the main target was Lyanna. Expelliarmus. A dazzling red light shot out from Cadmus's hand and hit the assassin squarely, throwing him far away. He collided with one of the wooden pillars that supported the wooden structure and let out a muffled groan as he fell heavily to the ground. "Assassins!" a woman screamed in a loud, horrified tone. The chaos truly began at that moment. People ran in panic as they tried to flee as quickly as possible, including stepping over others. Cadmus couldn't help but want to kill that woman. The assassin took advantage of the moment of chaos and sneaked away, escaping. Lyanna was terrified. She had seen the cold blade coming dangerously close to her. If it weren't for Cadmus, she really would have died at that moment. This completely terrified her. "Protego." Cadmus spoke in a cold tone. A shield of blue energy formed around all the women present. "My queen, stay within the shield, it will protect you from any physical or magical attack." Cadmus spoke to Lyanna with a solemn expression. He felt more magical signatures around, showing that it wasn't just one assassin. "I won't leave," Lyanna said in a firm tone. She believed in her savior without any hesitation. Looking at Queen Elia, who was being protected behind Lyanna, and then at Princess Rhaenys and Princess Daenerys, Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. "Do not leave under any circumstances, there are several assassins around." They all nodded. They had personally seen how fast the assassins were, showing that they were beyond professional. They were true killing machines. Not caring about the other women, Cadmus did not hesitate to step out of the protego. He did not draw his wand and continued walking around while dodging the running and screaming people. The king's guard had not arrived, nor had the soldiers of House Targaryen, showing that they were equally busy. It was a large, premeditated attack. Cadmus wanted to kill all the assassins as soon as possible. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from behind a person and advanced towards Cadmus. The mage showed a cold smile and was not slow in his actions. He raised his hand and fired a bright plasma bolt at the assassin. The assassin did not expect the mage before him to be able to react at such a short distance. Mages always had fragile bodies. If he could get close to Cadmus, he was confident in killing the mage in an instant. However, this was only his thought, as the plasma bolt hit him instantly. His clothes evaporated before the terrible heat of the plasma bolt, followed by his flesh and blood. In the end, a charred corpse fell lifelessly to the ground. Cadmus did not lower his guard. He looked up and felt that the other magical auras were approaching. Frowning, he noticed that the energy was greater than the assassin's, but it wasn't a mage's magic, but rather like magical items. Cadmus's response came in an instant. Two shadows advanced towards him from different directions. They were as fast as the wind, looking like blurs in the night. The mage simply created a protego around himself, watching the daggers, glowing with runes, collide against the magical barrier. The runes used on the dagger are the work of an amateur, who should complain to the manufacturer. Cadmus said with a touch of mockery in his voice. The assassin's response was a flaming blade that collided with the protego, but the spell remained motionless. Ah! If things were in chaos before, now they turned into complete pandemonium. The flames from the daggers began to burn the wood around. Cadmus frowned, and with a movement of his hands, a large amount of water manifested around and swept away the flames. Controlling the water, he made sure the people around were thrown safely away from the assassin's attacks. However, Cadmus did not move the protego that protected the members of House Targaryen and House Tyrell. The assassins had magical items, which made things quite problematic. He didn't know what items they were or their capabilities. Suddenly, Cadmus retreated while maintaining the protego around him. In the place where he was, a fiery red light swept the surroundings with even more voracious flames. The flames seemed alive, swallowing everything around with hunger and destruction. Inside the protego, Lyanna was frightened by the flames colliding with the blue shield, but she was relieved to see that the shield remained firm and showed no sign of breaking. Incredible! Daenerys commented with wide eyes as she watched the fight with fascination and admiration in her gaze. It was a fight she had never dreamed of seeing in her life. He seemed perfectly calm while fighting the assassins, as if he were playing a fun game. She had to admit, she liked seeing the cold smile on his lips. It was terribly charming and dangerously beautiful. Daenerys was not the only one showing admiration. Rhaenys, Margaery, and even Olenna watched the scene with admiration. Cadmus was fighting the assassins by manipulating lightning, water, and flames. The whole process seemed easy and not dangerous at all for him. Since my future husband is going to betray me, I might as well betray him, right? Margaery thought with a calm expression. There was a smile on her lips as she watched Cadmus masterfully fight the assassins. Cadmus didn't know he had gained the women's admiration. He was enjoying the battle. Although they weren't mages, the assassins seemed accustomed to using the magical items, so they were efficient. However, no matter how strong a magical item is, you are not mages. Cadmus murmured with a calm look as he watched the two figures circling around him, looking like wolves ready to bite their prey. Removing the protego that protected him, Cadmus took a step forward. How could the assassins miss such a good chance? They advanced instantly, their daggers glowing with a vibrant and hot red sheen. However, they soon regretted their actions. Petrificus totalis. Showing a mischievous smile, Cadmus cast two spells at the same time. A purple light flashed and hit both assassins simultaneously, freezing them. Only their eyes moved. It's a spell used by young apprentice mages. Cadmus commented with a cold smile, seeing the two assassins at his mercy. Although it's said that you should approach mages to defeat them, attacking an experienced mage head-on is extremely stupid. I'm going to enjoy getting information from you too. Cadmus said, smiling, ready to use crucio on these people. However, he didn't, as he heard heavy and fast footsteps coming in his direction. A large number of soldiers were arriving. "It seems the attack has been neutralized," Cadmus murmured as he conjured a steel chain with transfiguration and bound the 2 assassins. Of course, he also took the 6 daggers from the 3 assassins. 3 assassins, 1 dead and 2 captured. "I really have to make some magical items to protect the members of House Targaryen. I might not arrive fast enough." Although he was extremely strong, perhaps too strong, he was not omniscient, where he could protect the king and everyone around 24/7, that was impossible. While he was muttering, the army had already arrived, and leading it was the king himself, protected by the king's guard. There was blood on the king's clothes and on his sword, showing that he had also fought. Rhaegar looked at the scene before him with a pounding heart. There was nervousness and even an incredibly strong fury bubbling in his chest. Fury that was extinguished when he saw his 2 wives, sister, and daughters completely safe. Looking at the blue shield protecting them, Rhaegar knew that Cadmus had protected them. He couldn't help but thank the gods for having accepted Cadmus. Just thinking about what would have happened if Cadmus hadn't been present, a bad chill ran through his body. "I have to say, my king, this job is quite dangerous. I want a raise," Cadmus said with a smile as he kicked one of the assassins in his private parts. The assassin's eyes widened as he glared furiously at Cadmus. The men present made the same expression, an expression of pain and fright. "I will give you a rich fiefdom." Rhaegar let out a laugh and spoke in a genuinely grateful tone. He was truly grateful at that moment. "I thank you in advance." Cadmus bowed elegantly as he looked at the king with a satisfied look. Working for a generous boss was very good. However, we have work to do, especially to find out who ordered this assassination. Showing a cold look at the 2 assassins, Cadmus said calmly. Rhaegar showed an equally cold look and asked, "I presume you have some magic that causes pain?" "Of course I do, they will love to experience it. I just hope they can last a minute," Cadmus commented, looking at the 2 captured assassins with a playful look. After all, the Cruciatus curse was not something a human could endure for long. Chapter 28, Danger Lurking in the Surroundings. How many attacked? After seeing the king comforting both wives and the remaining women, Cadmus looked at Arthur beside him and asked in a calm tone. The blood on Rhaegar's clothes and Arthur's armor showed that there had been a fight. "About 50, a small army fully armed with steel armor and swords." Arthur looked at Cadmus with a grateful gaze. If Cadmus hadn't been present, this celebration would have ended in a great disaster. Cadmus looked at Arthur in shock and asked with a skeptical and incredulous tone. "Are you saying that an army of 50 fully armed men was hidden nearby and no one saw anything, not even a suspicious movement?" Arthur's face was grim. Just as Cadmus said, such a large group of people, fully armed and hidden nearby, was completely insane. No one was blind, and such a massive movement of people could not go unnoticed. "We are waiting for the Master of Whisperers' report," Arthur said in a calm tone, but there was an unmistakable coldness in his voice. Not only him, but it was a look that all the king's guard around also displayed. "It seems Tywin really wants to make things as chaotic as possible," Cadmus said, looking at the king with a deep gaze. He could imagine how furious Rhaegar would be if Lyanna or Elia had died at that moment. Does he want to force the king to attack and gain the initiative of the war? But no one is foolish enough to fall into such an obvious trap. Cadmus asked with a curious tone. Even if Rhaegar were forced to march towards the rock, no one would be foolish enough to go to the Westerlands knowing there was an ambush. If it really is Tywin, I have to say he is truly a monster to use his own relatives, especially when his heir, son, daughter, and grandchildren are present at this moment. If something happened, the main line of House Lannister would disappear. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard, Gerald Hightower, spoke in a calm tone. "It's likely not Tywin." Cadmus shook his head. If there was one thing Tywin cared about, it was House Lannister itself. Without descendants, House Lannister would simply cease to exist, at least the main line. If it's not Tywin, who is bold enough to orchestrate such a large assassination and offend all the nobles present. Lewin Martell, King's Guard and brother of Doran Martell, spoke with a confused tone. The Dornish prince looked exactly like a Dornishman, olive skin, black hair and eyes. He had a beard around his face and looked courteous and handsome. Who knows, but the mastermind will eventually appear. After all, he wants something. Cadmus was not worried about finding out who it was, whoever it was would eventually reveal themselves. Gentlemen, I have work to do, I will extract information from these two human wastes. Cadmus said with a smile as he grabbed both assassins by the collars. I advise you not to get too close to the dungeon, or you will hear quite frightening screams. The King's Guard looked at each other, and they all felt shivers running down their bodies. They did not doubt for a minute that Cadmus could inflict pain on someone. Cadmus didn't know what the King's Guard was thinking. He arrived at the dungeons below Harrenhal and had to admit, Harren the Black was crazy. Even the dungeon seemed to be used to torture and imprison giants. With a wave of his hand, the chains attached to the walls looked like snakes, wrapping around the limbs of the two assassins, lifting them into the air. Look, I'm quite gentle, so I'll give you a chance. Cadmus spoke as he put black gloves on both hands. He looked at both assassins with a calm gaze. You tell me who the mastermind was, and I will give you a quick and painless death. After a minute of silence, Cadmus knew that the assassins would not reveal anything unless they suffered a little. I am quite reluctant to use dark magic, they are quite invasive to the mage's own mind. Unfortunately, you are not giving me a choice. Gentlemen, there are 3 unforgivable curses in magic, one of which is exactly what I am about to perform on you. Cadmus said in a calm tone. He pointed his glove-covered finger at the first assassin and whispered. Crucio. There was no flash of light when the magic was performed, only the purest sound of horror reverberating off the dark, damp walls of the cell. Agur. Kill me. Kill me. Kill me. The assassin didn't even last 10 seconds before begging for death. He thrashed, the chains clanging, screaming a high, loud sound. The second assassin had an expression of pure horror and fear. Both were assassins who were trained to remain firm and indifferent to torture, but his companions simply started screaming in 10 seconds. Not even when they were children did he hear his comrade in arms scream like that. Cadmus stopped and asked again. Who is the mastermind? The tortured assassin raised his head with difficulty and looked directly into Cadmus's eyes. There was fear in his gaze, but he remained silent. I admire people like you. Cadmus said, but he raised his hand again. Crucio. Arg. Agur. Arg. The scream sounded again as the assassin thrashed, blood ran from his wrists, but he didn't seem to feel anything but the pain of the crucio. Which was normal, the crucio simply caused the pain the person feared the most. It was such a terrifying magic that the creator was a total madman. 30 seconds later, Cadmus stopped again. He looked at the assassin, who was now unconscious, with a calm gaze. With a movement of his hand, a ball of water formed around the assassin's head. 5 seconds later, the assassin woke up, but Cadmus did not undo the ball of water, which naturally began to drown the assassin. When he saw that the assassin was about to lose consciousness again, Cadmus stopped and undid the ball of water. I can't use crucio on you repeatedly, after all, you will become demented if I continue, but don't think I'm not creative. Cadmus commented as he approached the assassin. He couldn't use crucio on the assassin, or he would either die or become mentally ill. The mage took a vial from his pouch and made the assassin drink the liquid against his will. It's an itching potion, harmless, but when the dose is high, well, it will be a little uncomfortable, my dear friend. Cadmus said with a smile, but that smile looked scarier than a demon coming from hell. The assassin's exhausted eyes widened, feeling the itch all over his body. He wanted to scratch, but his hands and feet were bound by the chains, which made things even worse for him. He thrashed as his eyes turned red from all the pain and anger he was feeling. "You son of a bitch! I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your whole family. It itches, damn it." Cadmus didn't show much reaction to the insults. He waved his hand, and the ball of water reappeared around the assassin's head. Itching, drowning, pain, and heat. Cadmus began to use magic and potions to undermine the assassin's will. Honestly, he could extract information much easier using Imperius, but this magic was quite ineffective against people with strong wills, so he had to torture the assassin before he could perform Imperius. Half an hour later, Cadmus was about to continue but stopped when he saw that the assassin was not moving. Approaching, he understood that the assassin had completely died, which confused him, as he had perfectly controlled the strength of his spells. "I forgot that the human mind has a pain limit," Cadmus muttered to himself with a quite dissatisfied tone. Looking at the second assassin, who was trembling with pure terror in his expression, Cadmus said in a gentle tone, "Fortunately, I have another chance to hone my techniques." Seeing that the demon was looking at him, the second assassin screamed loudly, his voice so shaky that if Cadmus hadn't listened again, he wouldn't have understood a word. "I'll talk. If you had cooperated from the beginning, you wouldn't have seen anything scary or suffered any pain," Cadmus said with a smile. "However, I only believe in my magic." "Imperius." Cadmus cast the magic instantly. The assassin's expression changed from pure terror to a serene and gentle expression. Unlike the Cruciatus curse, being targeted by the Imperius curse, when cast properly, was not an unpleasant experience. In fact, it was the opposite. The victim of an Imperius curse was placed in a calm, trance-like state, in which all feelings of responsibility and anxiety were banished. "Who was the mastermind?" Cadmus asked with a smile. "I don't know. He arrived at our organization in Pentos and bought the deaths of Queen Elia and Lyanna." The assassin did not hesitate to answer with a gentle and warm tone, as if he were talking to a longtime friend. "Any special features or smell?" Cadmus continued to ask. He was not particularly surprised by the assassin's words. However, the next words surprised him. The man had a thick, aged voice, perhaps around 50 years old, but he smelled of lavender, lilac, or rose water. Chapter 29, Danger Lurking in the Surroundings. "Commit suicide," Cadmus said in a calm tone as he threw a dagger at him. The assassin simply smiled and plunged the dagger into his own head while still smiling gently, as if what he was doing was a good thing. "What terrifying magic!" Cadmus muttered in a calm tone. He was truly shocked by the three curses. All three spells were extremely inhumane, capable of killing, torturing, or controlling a person's mind, body, and soul. However, his last words are a problem. Cadmus said with a tone full of helplessness. Although the smell and voice were indeed a clue, this was easily changed with a little makeup and disguise techniques. If he were to arrest anyone with a voice like that and smelling of lavender, lilac, or rose water, Cadmus felt that the Harrenhal dungeon didn't seem so big at that moment. However, he discovered that the assassins were from Essos, which was a step forward in the clues. Looking at the two lifeless bodies, Cadmus shook his head and left the dungeon with a calm expression. As soon as he saw the sun outside, he noticed that the guards around looked at him with frightened expressions. They had obviously heard the screams inside the dungeon. The poor guards didn't even dare to raise their heads when Cadmus passed by them. Their bodies even trembled for a moment, showing how scared they were. This left Cadmus speechless. He felt he had reinforced the stereotypes that mages were dangerous and inhumane. People's prejudice is like huge mountains. Not even I, a handsome mage, can escape this situation. Although he spoke this way, there was an amused smile on his lips. Having a reputation for being cruel was not entirely bad. After all, fear was still one of the best ways to control people. When Cadmus returned to stand before Rhaegar, the king was in comfortable clothes with both wives beside him. There was an exchange of comfortable smiles full of kindness between the three, leaving the mage speechless. He refused to accept that he was envious and spoke in a calm tone. "Your Grace, the result of the torture was not as good as expected. Just say what you got, we will try to unravel this together." Rhaegar certainly knew how firm and tough an assassin could be, so he was not surprised by Cadmus's lack of success. However, the next words surprised him. The assassin said that a man came to Pentos, where his organization's headquarters is, and bought the death of Queen Elia and Queen Lyanna. The man had a thick, aged voice, perhaps around 50 years old, but he smelled of lavender, lilac, or rose water. Cadmus said in a deep tone. Elia and Lyanna's faces did not look good at all with Cadmus's words. No one would be happy to have an enemy in the shadows ready to send assassins at any moment. Could they sleep without worries? Especially after seeing Cadmus's fight with the assassins. Rhaegar's face was also grim. There was obviously a force in Westeros looking at his kingdom with greed. As for who it was, he had no idea. Could it be a descendant of Sarah, the old king's daughter? Elia regained her composure and spoke with an uncertain tone. In her eyes, to get the throne, one would at least have to have Targaryen blood, so Sarah's descendants were the main culprits. They have an empire of brothels throughout the continent of Essos, which Sarah built hundreds of years ago. They have never shown any interest in returning to Westeros. Rhaegar shook his head and spoke with an equally uncertain tone. Although Sarah's descendants had never given any sign that they wanted to return to Westeros, Rhaegar knew that people changed. No one could remain the same as they were, especially a new individual with great ambitions. "We were free from House Blackfyre, now another bastard house appears looking at the Seven Kingdoms," Lyanna said with a distressed expression. The Blackfyre rebellions were truly a bad thing for Westeros, as they came every few decades. Fortunately, in the last Blackfyre rebellion, the Kingsguard Knight, Barristan Selmy, had cut off the head of Meleys the Monstrous, ending the male line of House Blackfyre. A light bulb went off in Cadmus's mind upon hearing the name Blackfyre. He looked at the king and asked, could it be the Blackfyres? The one who answered Cadmus was Barristan Selmy the Bold himself. "Lord Peverell, I personally killed Meleys the Monstrous. I cut off both his heads." Meleys had two heads, his own and the head of his dead twin brother on his neck, as Meleys himself had killed his brother while still in the womb and become deformed. "You killed the last male member, which doesn't mean he didn't have daughters in secret in the Golden Company." Cadmus's words surprised everyone, but Rhaegar shook his head and spoke in a calm but helpless tone. "If it's true, then we will face a Blackfyre rebellion while fighting a possible civil war." A heavy atmosphere hung in the air. If it were true, then the future would indeed be troubled. It was wars on all sides. Looking at their expressions, Cadmus sighed and did not mention that humanity would face a war for survival in the coming years. Otherwise, Rhaegar's expression would not be so calm at that moment. "Your Grace, I wanted to talk about my confrontation with the Faith." Feeling that the atmosphere was too tense, Cadmus changed the subject. He wanted to give some good news amidst such bad news. Rhaegar nodded and spoke. "Any doubts?" "Not at all. I already have a plan to weaken the influence and strength of the Faith." Cadmus's words surprised Rhaegar. He didn't expect Cadmus to make a plan in such a short time. "My plan is simple. We will invite a new religion to Westeros." Cadmus once again surprised Rhaegar, making the king's eyes widen. "Fighting the Faith is quite complicated, so it's better to leave it to professionals. I spoke with Lady Kinvara, the High Priestess of the Red Temple of Volantis, and she was quite interested in making a proselytizing trip to Westeros. She would bring 100 ships full of red priests and priestesses, as well as a fully equipped and experienced army." Cadmus said with a smile. "What do you want to do, Cadmus?" Get straight to the point. Rhaegar felt quite tempted to accept the proposal but wanted to know what Cadmus was thinking at that moment. Let the two religions kill each other while weakening themselves, the king will only need to intervene when things escalate into a situation of total chaos, becoming a mediator between the two religions. Over time, the influence of both faiths will balance out, and the faith of the seven will not have as much prestige or strength among the common people. Cadmus's strategy was simple, something used over millennia by kings and queens to weaken the ruler's enemies. Will the high priestess agree to become a sword in my hands? Rhaegar frowned and felt that the plan was good, but would anyone really willingly agree to become a pawn in someone else's hands, especially someone as powerful as Kinvara? Your Grace underestimates the eagerness of religions to spread their faith to other peoples. The Red Faith has always wanted to spread throughout Westeros but never had the opportunity, and the Targaryen kings were also not interested in it. Cadmus said with a smile. The more influence the Red God had over Westeros, the more power he had. It was a temptation that Kinvara and other leaders of the Red Faith could not ignore and did not want to. A smile appeared on Rhaegar's lips, good news after a long time. Perhaps another Targaryen king would have hesitated, but Rhaegar was everything one could expect from a bold king. Knowing that the situation was so critical, he didn't mind following Cadmus's plan. I accept. You can ask the High Priestess to come as soon as possible. She is authorized to build a red temple in King's Landing. Rhaegar spoke in a calm and deep tone. There was sarcasm in his gaze, as the place he expected the old temple to be built was in front of the Great Sept of Baelor. However, the Red Faith must adapt to the customs of Westeros, no slaves and no burning people. Rhaegar added with a touch of harshness, remembering what society was like in Essos. I had already told her that, and she accepted the terms. Cadmus said with a smile. Rhaegar was surprised and looked at Cadmus with a satisfied gaze. Having such a good subordinate was truly comfortable. Chapter 30, Danger lurking in the surroundings. Before leaving, Cadmus remembered something and spoke to the king in a calm tone. My king, I will craft some magical items with defensive magic. I may be absent for some time, as they are quite laborious to make. That's fine, I will call you if anything urgent comes up. Rhaegar nodded and didn't worry too much. He looked at Cadmus. By the way, the tournament will continue tomorrow. I won't let these things spoil the best day of my son's life because of a few conspirators. I will prepare a gift for the newlyweds. Cadmus said with a playful expression. He wanted to burst out laughing thinking about the gift but restrained himself. However, Margaery will certainly thank him when she receives his gift. After leaving the king's chambers, Cadmus wasted no time and returned to his personal quarters. He had a lot of work to do. Unlike potions that needed a cauldron and chemical flasks for purification, the crafting of magical items was more simple. It only required carving runes onto the object. Of course, if it were that simple, magical items wouldn't be rare, especially powerful rare items. However, Cadmus had even made a briefcase that looked more like a small world, so what were a few basic magical items containing protective spells? The only problem was that carving runes was time-consuming and mentally exhausting. 7 items are enough. Cadmus muttered as he took 7 different objects from his pouch. 3 were rings, 2 were earrings, and 2 were bracelets, all made of silver without any jewels or other luxury. Now that I think about it, these things are more expensive than a Valyrian steel sword. He muttered as he took his wand and began to carve runes onto the silver body of the first ring. Safety items are always more expensive than attack items. The magical item was not single-use, it could be passed down from generation to generation, especially with a shield spell like Protego. Cadmus could imagine that many would give a mountain of gold just for one of these magical items. Being so good is sometimes quite sad. Cadmus whispered with a laugh, feeling satisfied at his ability to earn money easily. Money was never too much, especially in this world where armies cost a lot. Cadmus concentrated and began to carve the runes into the silver metal and let time pass. When he looked up, he noticed that the moon was already high in the night sky. Stretching, he looked at 2 of the 7 finished items and let out a tired sigh. 3 days should be enough. Pouring himself a glass of wine, Cadmus was about to drink to relax, but as he was ready to drink, he heard someone knock on his door. Without getting up, he waved his hand, and the door opened, revealing a figure he didn't expect. "It's a bit late for a visit, my lady," Cadmus commented casually, looking at Marguerite at his door. "Good evening, Lord Peverell." Marguerite tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and said with a smile on her lips, "May I come in?" Cadmus narrowed his eyes but nodded and gestured for her to sit beside him, something Marguerite readily accepted and sat down some distance from him. "Would you like a drink?" Cadmus asked like a good host. There was an amused smile on his lips. "I want something strong," she said with a smile, looking at Cadmus with a narrow, seductive gaze. The smile on her red, plump lips seemed especially tempting at that moment. Cadmus transfigured a flower into a glass and poured whiskey for the young woman before him. Then he made the glass flow to the young woman, who watched everything with an expression of admiration and fascination. "Magic is truly interesting," Marguerite said with the glass in hand. Her words were genuine. Magic was indeed interesting. It could turn a flower into a glass and even float items, although it wasn't as impactful as the fight she witnessed. Cadmus laughed and didn't comment, just drank his wine while looking at Marguerite. He had to admit, the young woman was beautiful. Although she didn't have a voluptuous body, she was graceful and elegant, extremely attractive. The mage began to talk to Marguerite without asking the reason for the young woman's visit. Only someone inexperienced would start a conversation by asking the reason for her visit. The conversation was light and quite cheerful, with Cadmus making the white flower of House Tyrell laugh and exclaim in surprise with some jokes and curiosities. Suddenly, during the conversation, Marguerite let out a sigh that caught Cadmus's attention. "Am I such a bad host that I made my guests sad?" he asked with a smile, sensing that the main topic was beginning. "I presume Lord Peverell knows about the rumors circulating about my fiancé," Marguerite said as she brought the whiskey to her lips. She liked the drink, much better than wine in her opinion. Although she knew that many preferred wine to such a strong drink. 1. "Yes, but they are just slanderous rumors, you don't need to worry." Cadmus comforted the young woman with an amused smile on his lips. "If they were just rumors, I would be fine, but my fiancé doesn't seem interested in me." Marguerite spoke calmly while smiling elegantly, remembering the interaction she had with Aegon. She was used to seeing the lustful looks of the men around her, so she could tell who was interested in her or not. In Aegon's gaze, she only saw a feeling of friendship, without any feeling of lust. There was not a drop of lust in the gaze of Aegon, a 15-year-old boy. No matter how much she looked, there was something wrong with her fiancé. Along with the rumors circulating about Aegon, she knew that her future life would be difficult, or rather, non-existent. "He seems more interested in my brother." The casual touches on Loras's body, the smiles, and the laughter between them seemed almost like a couple. Every word that came out of Marguerite's mouth carried a tone of helplessness and sadness. "I came to ask for some advice, or even if there was something I could do to be attractive to my future husband." Marguerite looked at Cadmus with a look full of tears and expectation. Cadmus wanted to laugh at what was happening. If he didn't know Marguerite's personality, he might have been fooled by the girl's acting, but since he knew exactly who Marguerite Tyrell was, he just found it all funny. However, Cadmus was willing to play this game, as he knew who would get burned in the end, and believe me, it wasn't him. Cadmus shook his head and let out a helpless sigh. There is a love potion that can make a man fall madly in love, but this potion does not alter someone's nature. If a man who likes men takes the potion, it will not change his tastes at all. Just as a man who likes women will not start liking men. Marguerite was surprised by the existence of such an unusual potion but soon showed a disappointed expression. "It seems I have no hope," she said with a desolate and sad tone. A tear dropped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away with the sleeves of her dress. Although I can't make Aegon change his nature, I can make a hallucinogenic potion. Cadmus, seeing her expression, added with a smile. If he takes the potion, he will see the person he desires the most. 2. Although Cadmus's words sounded good and full of kindness, just thinking that her husband would be thinking and seeing a man in her place while they were in bed made anger and frustration bubble up in her chest. It was so insulting that Margaery wanted to scream at her father for choosing Aegon to marry her, a man who didn't even like women. However, as she was in front of Cadmus, she just let out a sad and cute sound. 1. Am I really that ugly, Lord Peverell? Margaery asked with a tone full of desolation. She was so anxious that, apparently in a casual movement, she placed her hand on Cadmus's thigh and looked directly into Cadmus's eyes. Looking at Margaery, especially at her beauty, Cadmus spoke sincerely. You are beautiful, any man would thank the gods for having you as a wife. Although Margaery was a manipulator, in a world like this, where women had no power, this was a very good survival quality. Furthermore, to control a woman like this, one had to be a real man. Suddenly, in a moment of impulse, Margaery advanced, claimed Cadmus's lips for a second, and as if she knew what she had done was wrong, she pulled away. Standing up quickly with a panicked expression, she tried to speak, stammered, and when she couldn't say anything, she hurried out of the room. Cadmus looked at Margaery's back and, seeing the door closed, could no longer hold back his laughter and began to laugh. She has a good act, posing as an innocent and young maiden, worthy of being Olenna Tyrell's granddaughter, who stole her sister's fiancé on the wedding day. Cadmus muttered with a laugh. Olenna's husband was originally engaged to Olenna's sister, but on the wedding day, Olenna invaded the groom's room and slept with him with such intensity that the poor man couldn't even walk to attend the wedding. But I am not someone satisfied with a simple kiss, and I don't like to be provoked or manipulated. You will get burned in this dangerous game, dear Margaery. Cadmus muttered with a predatory look in his usually gentle eyes. Chapter 31, The Blood Ritual. The next day. Lord Peverell. Barristan greeted the mage with a frigid expression. The old Kingsguard knight rarely showed any emotion. Perhaps the years of assassination made people quieter and colder. The blood has been prepared. As soon as Barristan spoke, Cadmus, who had been locked in his room for 3 days, nodded. His green eyes narrowed, and he looked at the Kingsguard with a calm gaze. Who won the tournament? Sir Arthur Dane, who crowned Lady Margaery as the Queen of Love and Beauty. Barristan spoke while gesturing for Cadmus to follow him, something the mage did while showing a bored reaction to who won. It seems the king wanted Arthur to win to make the betrothal even more legendary for the people. Cadmus said with a laugh. Rhaegar was truly shrewd, doing everything to improve his son's image in the eyes of the commoners and nobles. Barristan did not respond, but his silence was more than revealing, showing that Cadmus's words were correct. Although there were knights as skilled as Jaime Lannister or Brynden Tully, facing Arthur wielding an unbreakable sword was a completely unfair fight. When Cadmus arrived at the king's chambers, he was surprised to see Queen Rhaenyra present. After 4 days, the queen's appearance was very healthy. She showed no paleness or sadness in her gaze. However, looking into the queen's lilac eyes, Cadmus seemed to see an unquenchable flame burning. It was such a strong feeling of revenge, anger, and resentment that Cadmus could feel that the room's temperature was slightly warmer than usual. It was the first time Cadmus had seen a person manipulate magical energy without any training, based only on feelings. Emotion has always been a quite mysterious aspect of magic. A mother could conjure a protection spell so powerful that it killed a Dark Lord. The queen, who knows nothing about magic, is using her own will mixed with feelings to perform a miracle that only mages could. Cadmus thought with a great emotion bubbling in his chest. What he was seeing was so extraordinary that it made him wonder if he could unconsciously manipulate magic using only his own feelings. and after thinking about it, he found it impossible. Not that he didn't have emotions, but he simply had no reason to have such a great emotion. Averting his gaze from the queen, Cadmus greeted the king. "My king, as I said before, I have made all the magical items." With a wave of his hand, 3 rings, 2 pairs of earrings, and 2 bracelets flew towards the king and landed on the dark wooden desk. Each magical item is enchanted with a protection spell called Protego. The spell creates a barrier around the user, protecting them from all physical and magical attacks. Cadmus explained in a calm tone with a touch of pride in his voice. The spell lasts 15 minutes and takes a day to be used again. Rhaegar looked at the items on the table with a satisfied expression. This was a legacy that could protect all future kings and queens. This was so important to House Targaryen that he couldn't help but be moved. Looking at the young man with black hair and green eyes before him, Rhaegar showed a solemn expression and spoke with a tone full of majesty. "I will not be stingy, Cadmus. From this moment on, you are the Lord of Harrenhal." Cadmus seemed to have misheard. He looked at the king with disbelief. "What about House Went?" he asked with a confused tone. Harrenhal Castle was the property of House Went, which served King Rhaegar I Targaryen. Rhaegar sighed and spoke with a tone full of regret. "Didn't you notice that there are no members of House Went so far? Lord Walter Went passed away without direct descendants, and his wife had died giving birth to the stillborn child." "And the secondary branch?" Cadmus asked, frowning. Although he didn't care about the problems, if he wanted to control this huge castle, he would have to make the branches of House Went meet their maker beforehand. "They are too close to House Tully," Rhaegar said with a particularly cold tone. He deeply detested House Tully, filthy traitors, who didn't even have reasons to rebel during Robert's rebellion. Besides, those with the best chance of inheriting are Edmure Tully, since he is the son of Manisa Went, who was married to Hoster Tully. Rhaegar said calmly, he would never allow House Tully to get Harrenhal, much less the branches of House Went that were too close to House Tully. Cadmus finally understood why Harrenhal fell into his lap. However, he didn't complain at all. He was more than happy to get this huge castle. He was already planning to rebuild the castle the way he wanted. At the same time, he also wanted to kill those members of the secondary branch of House Went. He didn't want to wake up and hear furious screams from some stupid descendants of House Went. "Your Grace is certainly the best king a vassal could have," Cadmus said with a laugh and praised Rhaegar without sparing compliments. Although he knew that the king wanted him to serve as a wall on the Trident, preventing House Tully's advance. However, he didn't care about that, as he was also using Rhaegar to get what he wanted. Rhaegar rolled his eyes but really didn't deny Cadmus's words. If he hadn't been quite generous, things would have been very different. After all, loyalty was a good thing, but loyalty linked to a network of interests was more solid than any loyalty based on words. Losing his smile, Rhaegar looked at Cadmus and spoke in a calm tone. "The blood for the ritual has been prepared. We killed about 140 pigs and sheep. The blood is stored in a part of the dungeon. My mother will be the first, then me and my whole family," he said, then looked at Rilla with a complex gaze. He managed to calm his mother, but he knew better than anyone how complex the feelings his mother was experiencing at that moment were. His concern was that Rilla's eyes resembled his father's eyes, a calm and deep gaze that hid a madness about to explode at any moment. According to the report Rhaegar received, Viserys' former wet nurse, who always accompanied Rilla, was found dead on the first day the truth was revealed by Cadmus. There were hand marks around the wet nurse's neck, while her eyes only presented 2 empty eye sockets. This shows how unsustainable his mother's mind was. Not only that, anything that involved the faith of the Seven was destroyed, including the people. In 3 days, dozens of people died, including 2 septons, who committed suicide with 7 stab wounds in the back. Fortunately, Rhaegar was quick and covered everything up, so no one noticed the lack of dozens of servants in this huge black castle. Rilla, who had been silent until now, looked at Cadmus with a calm gaze, although Cadmus felt that her eyes resembled those of a wounded animal pretending to be strong. "I will take care of you for the next few hours, my queen," Cadmus said in a gentle tone. He truly felt sorry for this woman who had suffered her whole life. At least at this moment, he wanted to give this strong woman some peace. "Thank you, Lord Cadmus." Rilla finally spoke. Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken for some time. However, looking at Cadmus, her gaze was gentler. "The ritual is private, so no one other than me and the queen will be present at the location," Cadmus said in a calm tone to Rhaegar. Anyone else could disrupt the blood ritual, as it was a meticulous and extremely delicate process. He didn't want to risk the widowed queen's life or even risk turning the king's mother into an insane and mad monster. He had just gotten a big promotion and didn't want to destroy his career because some idiot couldn't keep quiet during the process. Rhaegar didn't show much reaction and just nodded. With the unbreakable vow, as long as his mother didn't attack Cadmus, her safety was guaranteed. Chapter 32, The Blood Ritual. Cadmus arrived at the dungeons again, but this time, he did not head toward the bars where the cells were, but rather toward a dark, damp stone chamber. Behind him, Rilla, who remained silent, looked at the surroundings with a touch of curiosity. Upon reaching the location, the smell of blood was so strong that it made the mage and the queen frown, but both soon relaxed again. Given the importance of what was about to happen, what was a mere foul odor? Entering the stone chamber, Cadmus saw wooden basins a meter in diameter scattered throughout the place. However, even with dozens of these basins filled to the brim with animal blood, the place was still relatively empty. Cadmus wasted no time. He quickly took the potions from his pouch and began to prepare the blood. With the addition of the potions, the foul smell the blood exuded completely disappeared, leaving only a faint sweet scent lingering in the air. Seeing that the blood was ready, the mage began to draw a huge blood pentagram while placing red candles at each point of the pentagram. Runes were written in blood along the edges of the pentagram. Rilla watched everything in silence. She couldn't help but think that if Cadmus had appeared decades ago, her sons and daughters would have been saved, but fate was cruel and only allowed her to meet her savior decades later. However, Rilla did not complain about fate, not when she also discovered that her daughter and sons had also been poisoned with the same venom that had claimed her children. Without Cadmus, she did not know how many miscarriages, babies, and children would suffer from the poison running in the veins of the women and men of House Targaryen. When Cadmus finished painting the entire pentagram and the runes on the floor, he checked the work 3 times, trying to find any flaw, and after seeing that everything was perfect, he looked at Rilla and spoke in a solemn tone. "I will use the blood to purify the poison within the queen. It will be a little painful, but try to remain as still as possible." Rilla was indifferent to the pain mentioned by Cadmus. She preferred physical pain 1,000 times over the pain her soul was feeling at that moment. "What do I need to do?" she asked calmly as she stood in the middle of the pentagram. "Take off your clothes and stand naked, then I will bathe you in blood, and we will begin the ritual," Cadmus said while waving his wand. A large amount of blood rose from the basins and floated above Rilla. Rilla nodded and simply removed the dress she was wearing, including her underwear, standing completely naked before Cadmus. The queen might have been over 50 years old, but her body still exuded beauty and sensuality. Cadmus nodded and showed an indifferent look, as if the beautiful naked body before him was nothing more than a piece of wood. Without any hesitation, Cadmus injected magic into the pentagram drawn on the floor. The runes at the edges began to glow with a devilish red hue. The blood above Rilla seemed to be guided by an invisible hand, and a drop of blood touched the pale forehead of the widowed queen. The red candles lit up all at once. Flames shot up to the ceiling as terrible heat spread through the surroundings. Soon after, another drop and then another. In a short time, Rilla's entire naked body was completely drenched in blood. The blood outlined the curves of her body, which added a touch of wicked charm to her. Cadmus did not have time to appreciate the beautiful sight before him. The delicate process of magic manipulation required the mage to concentrate fully. The magic coursed through the queen's body like extremely fine threads, where these threads passed, a slightly transparent liquid running with the queen's blood was gradually eliminated. It was a slow and complex process. Any failure or distraction could lead to a disastrous end for the entire ritual. For Rilla, the process was even more exhausting and invasive. It felt like something was running beneath her skin. Besides being extremely uncomfortable, it was painful and agonizing. However, even suffering such intense pain, her expression had not changed at all. 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Feeling that there was no longer any trace of poison in Rilla's body, Cadmus opened his eyes and stopped the spell. There was a deep exhaustion in his gaze. Staying 3 hours in a state of extreme concentration was extremely draining. Cadmus felt a deep admiration for the doctors who spent 12 hours in surgery. Although it was not the same, he still felt admiration. Looking at Rilla, naked and covered in blood, Cadmus approached her and used his cloak to cover her nudity. "It's over, my queen," he said in a gentle tone while looking at Rilla with admiration and respect. The woman had not let out a single whimper of pain. Her expression remained the same from beginning to end. This kind of determination was simply astonishing. Rilla reacted and looked at Cadmus. Just like the mage, there was a deep exhaustion in her gaze, but her eyes were firmer and more determined than ever. "They will feel the pain I felt. I will make them regret being born into this world. I will kill everyone, women and children. Everyone will burn with fire and blood," Rilla said in a chilling and terribly cold tone. The pain had only clarified her thoughts. She would make everyone who dared to poison her and her family suffer 10 times worse. "Burning Old Town is a good choice. I can imagine the Hightower House tower burning like a gigantic torch," Cadmus said with a smile, showing an equally cold grin. Before, it was just a natural antipathy against the faith of the Seven, but now he truly wanted to destroy this filth from the face of the planet. As for the gods, Cadmus was very interested in dissecting the body of a god. "Aren't you going to try to stop me or advise me?" Rilla was surprised by the answer and asked in a curious tone. Even Rhaegar would not support her in burning Old Town because the citizens were innocent. "No," Cadmus said with a smile. "I'll watch you burn that city with a bucket of popcorn. I truly want you as my good son," Rilla said with a laugh, her first laugh in those 4 days. Cadmus blinked and asked with a chuckle, "Are you offering your daughter's hand? If so, I might consider being your good son. It seems Daenerys has charmed you, my dear Lord Peverell," Rilla said with a gentle smile. She was not surprised. All the women of House Targaryen were beautiful, few could be considered normal, and Daenerys was not normal. On the contrary, she was simply a beautiful and perfect woman. Cadmus shrugged and didn't mind being discovered. After all, everyone likes beautiful women, and he was no different. As for passion, Cadmus always thought that companionship and love were what truly made a marriage last. "However, I also think you are a good suitor for my daughter." Rilla adjusted the cloak that covered her nudity and spoke in a soft tone. "You have the power to protect her. For me, that's what matters most." Cadmus looked at Rilla in surprise but understood the queen's thoughts. If something were to happen in the future, Rilla hoped he would flee with Daenerys far away. The mage wanted to laugh. Flee. Although he didn't think he was more powerful than a god, Cadmus feared no one in this world. Even Sung Jinwoo's low-budget version, King of the Night, only represented a slight danger due to the mystery and unknown abilities. But Cadmus could understand Rilla's concerns. The future was destined to be chaotic, so chaotic that even a dynasty could crumble like a sandcastle. "I am honored to have the Queen's trust." Cadmus looked directly into Rilla's eyes and spoke in a calm yet extremely confident tone. "But I am strong. So strong that I could simply wipe a city off the map." Rilla looked into Cadmus's unwavering eyes and sighed. However, she chose to believe Cadmus. especially after seeing the look in his eyes. It was such a confident look that, for a moment, it seemed he could do anything. "I hope so, my dear lord," Rilla said with a smile. Chapter 33, The Blood Ritual. As soon as Rhaegar entered the place, he smelled a slightly sweet scent, unlike the horrible odor he expected. Looking at the pentagram on the floor, the strange runes, and candles at each point of the pentagram, he looked at Cadmus and said with an amused tone, "You look exactly like the church describes mages, demon worshippers." Cadmus looked around and had to admit that it was indeed similar, but he refused to be associated with crazy cultists. "Don't compare me to cultists, they are crazy people who think demons should be them." Rhaegar raised an eyebrow and looked at Cadmus with a surprised look. "You talk as if you truly believe in their existence." "I am a mage, believing that demons exist is not that strange," Cadmus said as he finished painting the pentagram again. He looked at Rhaegar and spoke in a calm tone. "Now take off your clothes and stand in the center of the pentagram." The king looked at the mage and frowned. He couldn't help but ask with a somewhat unpleasant expression, "Did you see my mother naked?" "A beautiful woman indeed," Cadmus said, remembering Rilla's body, but seeing the king's unpleasant expression, he laughed and said with a provocative tone, "Unfortunately, she didn't want to give you a stepfather." "Cadmus, has anyone ever told you that you are really annoying?" Suppressing the anger in his chest from hearing someone trying to be his stepfather, especially someone so young, Rhaegar spoke with a slightly annoyed tone. "Well, Geralt usually wants to kill me with his 2 swords, he says I know how to annoy people," Cadmus said in a casual tone. It wasn't his fault that people had sensitive feelings and couldn't handle the truth. "I can imagine why," Rhaegar said with a laugh, standing naked in the middle of the pentagram. Cadmus rolled his eyes at the king's words and spoke in a calm tone. "As I told your mother, it will hurt." "I can handle it," Rhaegar said with a confident tone, but his confidence soon crumbled like a sandcastle. His face contorted in pain as he felt something crawling beneath his skin. It was such an uncomfortable and painful feeling that he took a deep breath. Cadmus looked at Rhaegar's expression and couldn't help but compare his behavior with the queen's. This only confirmed the fact that one should never underestimate an angry woman. They are the cruelest creatures in the universe. Leaving his thoughts aside, Cadmus focused on his work. Since it was the second time doing the process and the amount of poison was less, the mage felt he was better at it, and the process was faster than Rilla's. Instead of lasting 3 hours, it lasted about an hour and a half. When the process finished, Rhaegar was kneeling in the center of the pentagram, breathing heavily. "I really want to kill all the Septons and Maesters," Rhaegar said with a tone full of anger regarding the pain he felt. At the same time, he was worried if his sons and daughters could endure such torture for so long. "How are you feeling?" Cadmus asked with a touch of exhaustion in his voice. He looked at the king with a curious gaze. "Aside from the pain in some parts of my body, I feel great, stronger than ever," Rhaegar said as he stood up and stretched his body. "I kind of understand why old Valyria was so obsessed with blood and dragons, those 2 things are simply incredible. I can't even imagine how many miracles they performed in 5,000 years. Blood magic acts mainly on the body, so what you are feeling is normal." Cadmus nodded, and seeing that there was nothing wrong with the king, he showed a satisfied expression with his work. "However, 2 procedures a day is my limit. If I push for 1 more, I will fall into a coma." Feeling dizzy and his legs a little weak, Cadmus said in a calm tone. Almost 5 hours of extreme concentration was too exhausting for him. Although he could take some potions to speed up his recovery, there was no need to rush, no one was dying at the moment. Rhaegar nodded, seeing Cadmus's slightly pale face, he couldn't help but sigh and looked at Cadmus gratefully. "Thank you for your effort, Cadmus. If it weren't for you, my family would have suffered even more." "No need to thank me, you've already given me titles, lands, and a castle, I'm just doing my job. Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. He did nothing more than his job and was paid, so he really saw no need for thanks. Just accept my thanks, you annoying boy. Rhaegar rolled his eyes and said solemnly, looking at the young mage. He was truly grateful for Cadmus's work. Without him, the future would be dark and cold. When I marry your sister, I want to see if he will thank me. Cadmus thought, laughing, imagining Rhaegar calling him good brother. He was sure the king's expression would be priceless. Looking at Cadmus's smile, Rhaegar, for some reason, had a bad feeling, but he thought he was being too paranoid. Picking up his clothes from the floor, he began to dress while still looking at Cadmus with a skeptical and cautious gaze. Come on, my mother finally wanted to have dinner with the family again and invited you, although other houses are present. Already dressed, Rhaegar spoke to Cadmus with a smile on his lips. Seeing Rilla eating with the family made his day more relaxed and happy. Cadmus was surprised but nodded, thinking that the queen was indeed quick and decisive. She obviously wanted to bring him and Daenerys closer as soon as possible. Unaware that he was being manipulated by his own mother, Rhaegar left the dungeons with a smile and saw Arthur and Barry stand waiting for him. Both king's guards visibly relaxed with the king's arrival, especially seeing that he looked healthier than ever. I need to take a bath, and then we'll go to the dining hall. Rhaegar said as Cadmus walked side by side while Arthur and Barry stand followed behind with their hands on their sword hilts. Even with no danger, they were still on guard for any occasion. Cadmus also felt he needed a comfortable bath after working so hard. Arriving at the dining hall, Cadmus saw a long table full of food, different dishes and cutlery spread along the table, which could easily accommodate 50 people. Cadmus looked at the guests. They were members of House Targaryen, Baratheon, Tully, Stark, and Tyrell. As for House Lannister, Jaime certainly couldn't appear, not when Rilla was present. Aerys might be mad, but in the end, he was still Rilla's brother. Jaime trying to kill her brother and husband/brother was still a fact that could not be ignored. Although Jaime was not present, his twin sister, Cersei, acted as the representative of House Lannister. Cadmus felt that dinner would be fun, especially seeing Cersei's closed expression and the graceful smiles of Queen Elia and Queen Lyanna. Rhaegar seemed indifferent to the gaze of so many people, especially the looks coming from House Tully. Accompanied by the 2 members of the King's Guard, the king sat in the main seat, but not before gently kissing both queens. Curiously, Cadmus sat next to Daenerys, where there was an empty seat. He looked at Rilla, who winked at him, encouraging him. The mage was speechless at the actions of the widowed queen, but he didn't complain. He really wanted to talk to Daenerys. However, Cadmus did not start talking immediately. He looked toward the only member of House Baratheon present and showed a satisfied look upon seeing that Shireen's face no longer showed the grayscale. Although the girl was not considered beautiful, without the grayscale, the girl could get a marriage with a good man in the future. Suddenly, feeling a gaze upon him, Cadmus looked toward House Stark and was surprised to see Arya wearing a blue dress, although the girl had an unpleasant expression on her face. However, upon seeing him, she waved animatedly at him, which Cadmus returned with a nod and a smile. Do you and the girl from House Stark know each other? Hearing the sweet and curious voice beside him, Cadmus looked at Daenerys and replied with a smile. I met House Stark on the King's Road, and when I saw that she had some talent for projection magic, I gave her a book to study. Daenerys's eyes lit up at Cadmus's words. She looked at him with admiration and asked with a hopeful tone. Do I have that talent too? Looking at the absurd amount of dormant magic within Daenerys, Cadmus wanted to say that she not only had talent, but the girl was truly a genius among geniuses. You have more than anyone in this room or even on this continent. Cadmus was sincere and spoke with a laugh, especially after seeing Daenerys's bright eyes. Chapter 34, Chaotic Dinner. Daenerys looked into those beautiful dark green eyes full of a confidence she did not have in herself. He seemed to see something special in her more than she saw herself. As if he was sure she could do it. Lord Peverell has more confidence in me than I have in myself. Daenerys whispered, keeping her gaze on his eyes. She found that she liked seeing that unconditional confidence in her. A look that no one had ever given her before. In the eyes of men, even her brother, she was a princess destined to marry to strengthen House Targaryen in this troubled and tense time. But before those eyes, she felt she could be much more than a princess. You should be more confident, my princess, your destiny is to be more than a simple princess. Cadmus said with a smile. Unlike the Daenerys who suffered exile in Westeros, ate garbage and suffered all kinds of abuse, the Daenerys before him lacked determination and cruelty, but that was not a problem in his eyes. When one gains power, people change. When she gained dragons, Daenerys would change, becoming a true dragon. Cadmus had no doubt about this, as Daenerys' nature was to be strong in the face of adversity. Daenerys' cheeks gained a faint, lovely blush, she felt a little shy before that gaze and looked away. You know how to compliment a lady, Lord Peverell, she said with a touch of jealousy in her voice. Cadmus laughed and drank some wine while looking at Daenerys with amusement. He had to admit, the girl was adorable. He really wanted to tease the princess, but since they were in public, he refrained from it and just looked at her. As I said before, you are a genius among geniuses. Cadmus said with a smile and continued speaking. The princess is like the mother of all flames, your control over flames surpasses anyone, and this is not flattery, the amount of magic within you is frighteningly large. Hearing his words, Daenerys lost her shyness and couldn't help but widen her eyes. She looked at her small body and felt absolutely nothing that Cadmus had spoken of. The princess looked at the handsome mage with a confused expression. Finding her reaction adorable, Cadmus said with a laugh. Your magic is dormant, it needs a little stimulus to awaken. This was also a characteristic of this world. Magic in people was dormant, it usually only awakened with a strong stimulus, such as someone's death, the fear between life and death, or simply falling from a relatively high place. Will I be able to have a power like yours during the assassination? Daenerys asked with a solemn look, the memory of the assassination truly impacted her deeply. It was the first time in her life that she felt the world was truly dangerous. At that moment, she wished for power more than ever. That is not power, it is just a simple application of basic magic against non-magical people. Cadmus said in a casual tone. A real fight between powerful mages would impact everything within 100 meters, or even kilometers. Daenerys widened her eyes at Cadmus's words, the desire for power only grew in her chest. She wanted similar power, the power to control her own destiny. Seeing the ambition growing in Daenerys' eyes, Cadmus smiled with satisfaction. Ambition, envy, and greed have always been the feelings that drive the human race. Without these things, most people would be content with the status quo and would never try to be better. But to answer your question, yes, you will have similar power. Cadmus said, looking into Daenerys' lilac eyes. Seeing that perfect face full of complex emotions, he had to admit, the girl before him was worthy of the title Delight of the Realm. I hope Lord Peverell can awaken my magic. Daenerys spoke in a solemn tone. There was no way she could refuse the power that was before her. She would not only have the power to control her own destiny but also the power to protect her family in this chaos on the continent. How could she deny that? Don't worry, I know exactly how to awaken your magic. Cadmus said with a confident tone, after all, it was simply throwing the girl onto a burning funeral pyre. Daenerys felt a wave of emotion run through her body. She wanted to awaken her magic as soon as possible, but she knew it was not the right time, especially during such an important dinner where almost all the great noble houses were present. Across the table, Rilla watched Cadmus and Daenerys interact with a small smile appearing on her lips. She knew her daughter better than anyone in this world. If Daenerys was not interested in someone, she would not even talk beyond a few words, speaking only with short and distant answers. She would never have smiled or even talked with such intensity as she was doing with Cadmus at that moment. This made Rilla happy, as she felt that marrying Daenerys to Cadmus would not be as difficult as she expected. "You are smiling, mother." Rhaegar noticed his mother smiling and couldn't help but show a surprised expression. "I am seeing two young people suitable for marriage." Rilla drank some wine and whispered to her son, who was one person away from her, with Elia separating them. Rhaegar followed his mother's gaze and saw Cadmus talking to Daenerys. His sister was laughing happily, and seeing the happy look on her face, he knew they were having a pleasant conversation. Remembering his mother's words, the king couldn't help but twitch his lips. "You want to give me a good brother?" Rhaegar asked in the same low tone while using his wine glass to block the view of his mouth. The conversation was all discreet, something Elia helped with by raising the volume of her voice while talking to Lyanna. "I just think the two are suitable, plus they can bring House Peverell closer to House Targaryen," Rilla commented in a calm tone. Every man needs a woman to give advice in difficult times. Honestly, Rhaegar was not against this marriage, not when Cadmus was so useful. Yes, it was a cold and self-interested view of the world, but as king, he had a duty to put the kingdom above his own feelings. "Do you think Daenerys will accept?" Rhaegar asked in a calm tone. Looking at her expression, "She won't refuse," Rilla stated in an equally calm tone. "I will talk to Cadmus. If he accepts, we will set the wedding date as soon as possible," Rhaegar said with a smile and quickly decided on one of the most important events in a woman's life. In this delicate moment, being in a hurry was essential, especially with a civil war exploding at any moment. "Since you gave him Harrenhal, you should also increase his fief, encompassing a good part of the Riverlands," Rilla said, already wanting to help Cadmus get an extremely large fief for her future good son. Rhaegar rolled his eyes at his mother's blatant favoritism, but he also did not oppose his mother's words. He wanted Cadmus to enter into conflict with the rebellious lords of the Riverlands. Nothing better for this than allocating a large fief to Cadmus. Honestly, House Darry already controlled 30% of the Riverlands, House Peverell would also control 30%, and the remaining nobles the other 40%. In his eyes, this was enough to tip the balance of power in the Riverlands toward House Targaryen, weakening House Lannister's dominance. Rilla also smiled upon hearing Rhaegar's words. It was the most she could do to help Cadmus and Daenerys. Seeing that Rilla and Rhaegar's conversation had ended, Elia and Lyanna returned to talking in a normal tone of voice. "Elia, that bitch is looking at our husband again," Lyanna commented, noticing Cersei's gaze focusing on Rhaegar again. This made her furious. She wanted to destroy that arrogant and narcissistic smile of Cersei's. "Let her look, she can look, but not touch. Is there anything more painful than that for a woman?" Elia said in a calm tone. There was a touch of sarcasm in her usually sweet and elegant voice. She knew Cersei loved Rhaegar. It was not once or twice that the Golden Lioness made sarcastic comments to her. "Still, I want to hit her," Lyanna said in a cold tone. As a woman of the North, she really had difficulty controlling her anger and impulse. "You don't need to hit her to cause her pain. Words are much more painful than a slap, my dear Lyanna," Elia replied in a gentle and warm tone. "I'll leave that to you. I'm terrible at a war of words," Lyanna said, looking at Elia with a smile. Elia laughed and looked at Cersei with provocation. She knew exactly which words would hurt Cersei the most. "Is there a problem, Elia?" Noticing Elia's provocative gaze, the arrogant Cersei asked in an elegant tone, but the presumption in her voice was unmistakable. Chapter 35, Chaotic Dinner. "It's nothing, I can't help but look at your beautiful children," Elia replied with a gentle and graceful tone. She looked at the three Tully children with a deep gaze. The golden hair and green eyes were so characteristic of House Lannister that there was no Tully trait in the children. After all, they are my sons and daughter. Cersei spoke with her lips raised, apparently satisfied with Elia's words. There was a sense of superiority in her gaze, especially looking at Rhaenys's mixed appearance and Aegon's pure appearance. And although Aegon looked like a Targaryen from head to toe, he did not have Rhaegar's strength or intelligence, meaning weak seeds with Dornish blood in Cersei's eyes. But Elia's next words made Cersei's smile stiffen. They look so much like Ser Jaime that sometimes I think he is the father. Silence took over the surroundings for a moment. Everyone's eyes focused on Queen Elia and Cersei. Whispers began to echo in the dining hall. However, many eyes focused on Cersei's sons and daughter. Just as the queen said, there was no trait of the father in the children. Some eyes fell on House Stark. Seeing the appearances of Robb, Sansa, and Arya, many eyes showed strange looks. Although Robb and Sansa did not have many Stark features, everyone could see a resemblance to the Lord of the North, and Arya was a Stark from head to toe. As for Tommen, Myrcella, and Joffrey, all three looked like a mold of Cersei. It would be normal for one or two to look alike, after all, House Stark was there as an example, but all three? The looks directed at Cersei could not be stranger at the moment. If she were a Targaryen, it would be fine, everyone was already used to it and ignored it, but Cersei was from House Lannister, which repudiates these heinous acts with all its might. Of course, they look a little like uncle, since we are twin siblings. Cersei spoke with a smile, but there was a cold and murderous look behind her calm gaze. She hated Elia for stealing her dragon and making her marry a fish, now she hated her even more. She really wanted to tear Elia's flesh and drink her blood. I know that, what did you think I was talking about? Elia showed a genuine expression of confusion and asked in an innocent tone. She was laughing inside, seeing that Cersei was actually trying to explain. Although she knew Cersei was not that intelligent and easily impulsive, she never thought it would be so easy. However, to prevent Cersei from escaping her trap, she looked at Edmure with a penetrating and cold gaze. If there was anyone more cowardly and incompetent in that dining hall, it was the heir of Riverrun. Even the children in the place were more competent than this cowardly man. Cersei clenched her teeth tightly, knowing she had fallen into Elia's trap. Having explained before Elia said anything else only made her situation even more passive. Under the queen's gaze, Edmure, who was about to speak, fell silent instantly. It was as if he were before a snake staring at its prey. The fear was so great that his face slightly paled. He shrank back and did not dare to look into the queen's eyes. Seeing Edmure's reaction, a dark and cold look reflected in Cersei's eyes. If Edmure had defended her, she might have escaped the trap, but her imposing husband could not even be brave before a fragile and sick woman. Cersei couldn't help but feel relieved that she had never given him a son or daughter. Such a weak man could never generate a descendant worthy of the sons and daughter she had with her twin brother. She was sure that, even without resorting to moon tea, Edmure's weak seed would never have managed to take root in her womb. When Cersei's brain was working at full speed, trying to find a way to try to diminish the rumors that would spread from this dinner, an unexpected voice sounded in the place. My sister thought too much, my queen, our Lannister blood has always been strong, and all Lannisters have golden hair. Tyrion spoke at that moment, he looked at the queen with a respectful gaze. You are right, my lord, lion's blood has always been strong in the descendants of House Lannister. I hope these children are as strong and warrior-like as their uncle. Elia smiled at Tyrion and spoke in a sweet and gentle voice. She did not mention the father for obvious reasons. I also hope so. Tommen and Joffrey will be great knights like my brother and will bring honor and glory to House Tully. Tyrion's smile deepened as he looked at the queen. His palms were sweating before Queen Elia's curious but penetrating gaze. Elia couldn't help but think that the dwarf was cunning with words, but looking at Tommen and Joffrey, she scoffed inside. One was as sweet as a girl, and the other seemed so arrogant that someone might think he was a prince. She seriously doubted they would be great warriors like Jaime Lannister. Cersei stared at Tyrion with a grateful look, but this look soon turned to disgust, seeing Tyrion's ugly appearance and different colored eyes. Noticing this, Tyrion regretted having helped Cersei. He really wondered if there was a brain inside Cersei's skull, as he had never seen anyone so stupid as to look with disgust at their own savior. This is so interesting. Cadmus, who was watching everything, couldn't help but comment to Daenerys. Seeing Cadmus's genuinely animated appearance, Daenerys couldn't help but find it extremely cute and laughed. My good sister has always fought with Cersei, they both hate each other to the extreme, you will see a lot of this in the future. I can imagine Cersei's hatred. After all, Cersei would have married Rhaegar if it weren't for Elia. Cadmus said with a laugh, finding the battle of words before him extremely amusing. If it weren't for Queen Elia's fragile health, he could assume they would fight physically. After all, Elia was a martell, a sand snake is always a sand snake. Daenerys nodded and was relieved that Rhaegar had not married someone like Cersei. If there was a venomous snake in the place, it was Cersei. She had never seen a woman as vile as Cersei, and she lived in King's Landing, the home of the most cunning and cruel ladies in the Seven Kingdoms. Suddenly, Daenerys looked at Cadmus and asked in a confused tone. Lady Margaery looked at you about 22 times. While everyone was focused on the conflict, she kept looking at you. Cadmus looked out of the corner of his eye and indeed saw Margaery, who was next to Aegon, discreetly looking at him, and couldn't help but look at Daenerys with a surprised look. The princess was truly observant. Showing a smile, Cadmus did not feel fear or nervousness, he really was not afraid of what Daenerys would think if she knew what happened the night before. He just commented with a laugh. The beautiful flower of House Tyrell is quite interesting, she likes manipulation. Daenerys understood the implications of Cadmus's words and couldn't help but get angry. Margaery was engaged to her nephew and dared to approach another man. However, she did not look at Margaery and focused her gaze on Cadmus. It seems you quite enjoyed provoking her. Daenerys said, she herself did not notice the trace of jealousy in her words. If the dish fell on the plate, should I refuse to eat? Besides, I'm single. Cadmus said with a laugh and teased the girl. Daenerys snorted and did not deny his words, he was single, as he had said. But she is the future wife of the King of the Seven Kingdoms, the future queen. The princess said with a penetrating look. Do you know why she came to my room? Cadmus asked with his lips curving into a smile. Without needing her answer, he answered the question. She saw her brother entering her fiancé's room in the middle of the night. 1. Daenerys tried to open her mouth, but no words came out of her lips. She imagined herself in Margaery's situation and would probably be furious to lose to a man. Looking at the tall, handsome, and charismatic Cadmus, he was indeed an excellent lover. That's no excuse to get involved with an engaged woman. Daenerys snorted and crossed her arms. I have seen countless men fleeing through windows and being chased by their lovers' husbands, it usually ends in death. Cadmus nodded and did not doubt it at all, the lover usually ended up dead or crippled. I promise to stay away from her if she doesn't look for me, of course. Before Daenerys's gaze, Cadmus said with a smile. Although he knew it was impossible for Margaery to stop what she started. Daenerys showed a satisfied look and drank the wine from her glass, feeling happier knowing that she interrupted the affair between Margaery and Cadmus. Chapter 36, Chaotic Dinner. Arya didn't understand what was happening between the adults, however, when she saw the arrogant-looking blonde boy staring at her with a smug look, the girl got angry. Sticking her fork into the chicken thigh, she glared fiercely at the boy and spoke. What are you looking at, you golden idiot? I look wherever I want, even if it's at horse-faced girls. Joffrey spoke with an angry and arrogant tone, looking at Arya as if he were looking at someone insignificant. Even though he wasn't a prince, he seemed as arrogant as one. How could Arya remain calm in the face of such insults? Without waiting for anything, she simply kicked the chair next to her hard. Since Joffrey was sitting on the edge of the chair went backward and the heir of Riverrun fell to the floor, but not before trying to balance himself on the table and pulling the white cloth off the dining table. What followed was the sound of countless things falling to the floor. Food, plates, and wine fell onto Joffrey's body, leaving him stunned by what had just happened. It wasn't just him, everyone near him had their clothes soiled and food on their bodies. Joffrey! Cersei was shocked by what happened and quickly approached with worry stamped on her face. She kicked my chair. Joffrey pointed at Arya and shouted with a tone full of anger and humiliation, especially seeing everyone looking at him. He felt everyone was mocking him and became even more furious. I want her to die. Silence hung in the air before the chaos finally began. Eddard rose from his chair and looked coldly at Joffrey on the floor, but then looked at Arya with a reproachful gaze and then looked at Cersei, who was helping the boy clean himself up. I apologize for my daughter's actions, Lady Tully. She was wrong and will be punished accordingly. Eddard spoke in a calm tone, but then his tone became more penetrating and colder. But controlling your son, wanting to take someone's life because of a children's fight is unacceptable. Cersei Tyrion tried to stop his sister from speaking, but it was too late. Are you teaching me how to raise my son, you stupid barbarian? Cersei stood up angrily and spoke with a cold and threatening tone. She looked like a lioness defending her son's honor against a threatening wolf. Your stupid wolf cub has no manners and looks just like her father, a barbarian. I will send a Lannister bastard to marry her, maybe then you tree-worshipping barbarians can have a little civilization. Tyrion felt his head spin hearing those words and knew that things would get completely out of control. Eddard's face darkened, and before he could do anything, Robb stood up furiously and spoke with an equally angry tone. Watch your words, Lady Tully, my sister is not someone for you to talk about however you want. How scary, I'm trembling. Cersei said with a sarcastic tone. Turning to look at Catelyn, she spoke with an even more sarcastic tone. I expected too much from my good sister, who can't even control her own children. Catelyn stood up furiously. She was already enraged when Cersei mentioned marrying Arya to a bastard. Now she completely lost control. If there was one thing she was, it was a mother who protected her own children. Without any hesitation, Catelyn slapped Cersei across the face. The pleasant sound of the slap echoed in the place, reverberating through the walls. The mouths of countless people opened watching the scene. This is better than any K-drama. Cadmus murmured with a genuinely excited tone. He knew the dinner would be chaos. After all, what could go wrong with bringing friends and enemies together for dinner, but he never thought things would escalate so quickly. Hit her harder, Lady Catelyn. Cadmus cupped his hands around his mouth and spoke loudly, breaking the silence around. He feared the fight would be too peaceful. He wanted chaos, especially at that moment. Cersei woke up from her stunned state and touched her cheek with an incredulous look, then the confusion was replaced by anger and fury. Without any hesitation, she lunged at Catelyn and pulled the red hair of the Lady of House Stark. Catelyn showed no weakness and also pulled Cersei's beautiful golden curls. Both began the most brutal fight in the animal kingdom, a brawl between women. Under the eyes of shock and disbelief, two of the noblest women on the continent began to roll on the floor while pulling each other's hair. They used their nails to scratch their opponent and kicks flew everywhere. Arya opened her mouth and never thought her mother could fight like she was doing at that moment, then a surge of pride bubbled in her chest. Hit her, mother. Teach that bitch the northern way. Where did you learn that word, girl? Eddard, who was also shocked by what was happening, couldn't help but look at Arya with an angry gaze. I heard Theon and Robb talking. Arya didn't hesitate to turn in the culprits while watching the fight with a look full of joy and excitement. Eddard looked coldly at Robb and Theon, who flinched under the cold and penetrating gaze of the Lord of the North. Both knew they were in deep trouble, and Eddard was creative with punishments. Hit her, Lady Catelyn. Elia raised her small fist and shouted loudly, there was a smile on her lips, showing how happy she was feeling at that moment. If it weren't for her weak physique, she would have done it a long time ago. Defeat that stupid and arrogant lioness. Lyanna was also fervently cheering for her good sister, fighting against Cersei. Rhaegar didn't seem to be in a hurry to stop the fight. There was a smile on his lips as he watched the fight between the two women. It was a rare spectacle that he didn't want to stop anytime soon. Remember Margaery, never show weakness at a time like this. Women's fights are crueler than men's. Olenna didn't miss the chance to teach Margaery and spoke with a sarcastic tone, watching the two women rolling on the floor. "You crazy bitch!" Cersei screamed as a fist hit her nose, making it bleed. She was completely furious and started fighting even more wildly. Strands of red hair with blood fell to the floor amidst her golden hair. Eddard finally felt that the fight was going too far and pulled his wife away, who was still trying to scratch Cersei's face and pull out a few more strands of her hair. "Eddard, let me go. I'm going to teach that woman not to offend my daughters." Eddard was sweating profusely. He had never seen Catelyn so furious in his life. There was a gentler look in his eyes. Although he hadn't married the woman he loved, he felt that his marriage wasn't entirely bad. A woman who cared for her sons and daughters was worthy of his love. "Enough, Cat." Eddard spoke in a firm tone. "Your daughters are watching." Catelyn finally stopped and looked back, where she saw Sansa's horrified expression and Arya's excited and admiring expression. For the first time in her life, she felt that Sansa wasn't as strong as she had hoped. If her future husband wasn't kind, how would she protect herself? Determined to make Sansa a strong woman, she showed a gentle smile to both daughters and calmed down. Looking arrogantly at Cersei, who had a broken nose with blood on her face, with missing strands of hair and some bruises on her face, the Lady of House Stark smiled elegantly again. Of course, Catelyn herself wasn't in good condition. Just like Cersei, she was missing strands of hair, and superficial bruises and scratches could be seen on her face. Her dress was wrinkled and even torn in some parts. However, it was obvious who had won the fight. The blood on Cersei's face contrasted sharply against her pale skin. "Women's fights are infinitely more interesting than men's fights," Cadmus said with a smile, feeling a little disappointed that it ended so quickly. She should have hit her more with closed fists to cause more damage. Daenerys next to him spoke with a tone disappointed with Catelyn's lack of technique. Cadmus just laughed and looked at the scene before him with a huge smile on his face. Chapter 37, Chaotic Dinner. Seeing Catelyn's husband helping him and seeing her own husband standing shocked, Cersei had never felt so furious in her life. Ed Muir was simply useless, so useless that he couldn't even protect her. With her face still bleeding, the beautiful woman shouted loudly. "Aren't you going to defend my honor, Ed Muir?" Ed Muir, despite being a weak man, still showed the determination to protect his wife, and before Tyrion could say anything to calm things down, the heir of Riverrun stepped forward and spoke loudly. "Lord Stark, your wife almost killed my wife. She has to take responsibility for her actions." Catelyn couldn't believe those words had come from her own brother's mouth. "Ed Muir, has this woman manipulated you so much that you would say such things about your own sister?" Ed Muir showed a conflicted expression, but looking at Cersei, the woman he loved more than anything in this world, he showed a determined expression and ignored his younger sister's words. Stepping forward, Eddard, with his cold grey eyes, spoke in a terrifyingly calm tone. "And what do you suggest to resolve this conflict, Lord Ed Muir?" "Naturally, a duel. Your wife offended mine with dirty and vile words. She has to pay." As soon as Ed Muir spoke, everyone's eyes widened to the extreme. Even Rhaegar, who was watching everything, started coughing up the wine he was drinking at that moment. Although Eddard was not as famous as in the other universe, Eddard was still a renowned, experienced warrior who wielded the legendary sword of House Stark, Ice. There were not 5 people in the entire continent who could make the Silent Wolf of House Stark take a fight seriously. Who was Ed Muir? Mediocre in every sense of the word, he earned the title of knight because he was Hoster Tully's son. A title he suspiciously won in a tournament at River Run. So, knowing that Edmure dared to challenge Eddard to a duel shocked everyone, even Cersei thought Edmure was crazy. Eddard frowned and looked coldly at Edmure. He wasn't worried about the possibility of winning, but Edmure was his wife's brother. By law, he was his good brother. And although he disliked Edmure, he was indeed his brother through his marriage to Catelyn. Killing a relative, even if it was a relative by marriage, was not something well regarded, much less honorable. The title Kinslayer was not a light one, it was a stigma that would stain his honor forever, a stigma that even his sons and daughters would carry for life. When someone thought of Robb in the future, people would remember that he was the son of the Kinslayer, which would not only make his eldest son's rule over the North difficult but would also affect the marriage of all his sons and daughters. I will ignore your words because you have drunk too much wine, Lord Edmure. Eddard said in a calm and cold tone. The words of the Lord of the North essentially gave Edmure an escape to retract his words. Everyone would think it was just the words of a drunk, and no one would care. Tyrion, seeing such a good chance, quickly intervened and spoke in a calm tone. My dear lords have drunk too much wine, it is best that everyone returns to their respective chambers and enjoys a good night's sleep. The dwarf could not even suffer the consequences if Edmure died during the duel, it would be the spark for a civil war without a doubt. And although he thought a war was inevitable, he wanted to postpone this terrible event as much as possible. Lord Tyrion is right, everyone should return to their respective chambers and rest, tomorrow will be a long day. Rhaegar had similar thoughts to Tyrion. He wanted to delay the war as much as possible. The longer it extended, the more he could strengthen himself. At the same time, he couldn't believe how crazy and stupid Edmure was to challenge the lord of a great noble house. Any fool with a minimum of noble education knows how terrible the consequences of killing a lord of a great noble house were. Cersei also knew this and held her husband's arm, looking at him with a penetrating and sharp gaze. All of Edmure's courage drained away before the gaze of his beloved wife. Without saying anything, she held her sons and daughter and dragged her husband out of the dining hall. But not before looking coldly at Catelyn, like a poisonous snake looking at the prey that escaped. Catelyn showed no weakness and looked into Cersei's eyes with a smug look. She had just won the battle and had reason to be proud. Mother, you were amazing. Arya approached her mother and looked at her with admiration for the first time in her life. Looking at the little eyes full of admiration, Catelyn felt a different feeling and admitted that she liked seeing her daughter looking at her with such admiration. Robb also looked at his mother with admiration. There was no son in the world who wouldn't be amazed to see his mother defending her own child. However, he soon frowned and spoke in a worried tone. Will this make our relationship with House Tully worse? After seeing Edmure controlled like a puppet by Cersei, Robb had no doubt that things between House Stark and Tully would become tense. And at this moment, where a war was already on the horizon, this was a terrible thing, as it meant that House Stark had no allies. Unlike Eddard, Robb was raised to be a lord and understood politics, as well as controlling the army, and he was a good warrior. Even being young, he could see that things would be complicated in the future. Eddard looked at Robb with a satisfied look and then looked at the king. Seeing the king's purple eyes staring at him, the Lord of Winterfell nodded his head. He saw a smile appear on the Targaryen king's lips. Remembering the wizard's words, Eddard knew he had no choice. His antipathy towards House Targaryen could not outweigh his concern for his own family. If House Stark had no allies, it would be isolated and surrounded by enemies. Especially with Riverrun on the right and the Vale on the left, once an army positions itself on the Trident, the entire supply line of the north will be cut off. Once that happens, the commoners will die without food and from the cold. He will have no hay for the horses or food for the army. With the Greyjoys at sea, it made trade and purchase impossible. Rhaegar, seeing Eddard nod to him, knew that the alliance between House Stark and Targaryen could resurface once again. This relieved much of the pressure on him, as 40,000 experienced soldiers were an army everyone wanted. Martell, Tyrell, Stark, and Targaryen could now be considered a huge power in his hands. This gave Rhaegar the confidence to resolve this war once and for all. "Mother, do you think we can marry Rhaenys and Gamon to Robb and Sansa? Maybe Arya?" Rhaegar asked in a calm tone. To further relax the tensions between houses Stark and Targaryen, he planned to marry his son and daughter. "The marriage with Lady Sansa will not be difficult. From what I see, the girl daydreams about princes and heroic knights." Rilla said in a calm tone. She knew Sansa's mentality well, as she spent some time with Catelyn and Sansa. "But the heir of Winterfell is difficult. Lord Eddard will not accept and will marry the heir to some lady of the north, perhaps with House Manderley. I heard that the Lord of White Harbour has 2 beautiful daughters," Rilla explained in a calm tone. After all, his marriage to Lady Catelyn, who is a faithful believer in the Seven, caused much discontent among the lords of the north, especially after a sept was erected in Winterfell. The heir needs a wife from the north to calm the hearts full of suspicion and skepticism of the lords of the north. Eddard really wasn't raised to be a lord. How could he allow his wife to erect a sept in Winterfell in a region where the old gods are worshipped? Rhaegar shook his head and sighed. He will still try to marry Rhaenys to Robb, but if not, marrying Sansa to Gamon will also be good. As for Makar, Rhaegar planned a marriage with the Stormlands. Shireen Baratheon was a good choice, as Robert's legitimate line had no children and the apparent heir was Stannis Baratheon. Cadmus looked at the subtle politics in the place and smiled. He truly found it fascinating how people without a drop of magic could decide the lives of tens of millions of people on a continent with just a few conversations. Suddenly, Cadmus saw Arthur Dayne approach the king and whisper some words in his ear. Then the king's face had a slight change in his expression. "Looks like I have work to do," Cadmus murmured to himself, seeing the gaze fall upon him. Chapter 38, The Burning of Duskendale. After dinner, Cadmus was urgently summoned to the Hall of 100 Hearths, where Rhaegar was seated on a black stone throne. The king's expression was indifferent, but his words made many eyes widen. "Duskendale has turned into a hell on earth. The entire city is full of zombies and ghouls." It wasn't just Cadmus who was present. Practically almost all of House Targaryen and 100 noble houses were also present. When everyone heard about the city's situation, they were completely incredulous. "How did this happen?" Eddard asked with an incredulous and confused expression. Duskendale was a fortress city. A large, thick wall protected the city. It wouldn't be so simple to invade the city that was once a power before the creation of King's Landing. "My Master of Whisperers, Lord John Connington, stated that the ghouls and zombies advanced from the port." Rhaegar answered what he read in the Raven that urgently arrived from King's Landing. "The city's situation is critical. Tens of thousands have died, and the number only increases as we speak." Everyone held their breath as they heard that tens of thousands of people had died. This was not tens of thousands of animal lives, but tens of thousands of people. Although nobles have a certain contempt for ignorant commoners, they know better than anyone that people are the noble's greatest treasure. Without them, the lord was just that, a lord without an army. So, hearing about the death of tens of thousands of commoners was a rare event. "This is terrible," Raymond, the hand of the king, said with a worried and solemn tone. "If the city gates are opened..." Raymond didn't need to finish the sentence for everyone to understand the implications of his words. Everyone felt chills imagining so many monsters spreading through the Crown Lands. The horde of man-eating monsters would only increase with the destruction of villages and hamlets. Honestly, if such a disaster were to happen, everyone would have a monster epidemic of hundreds of thousands of dead. "There is one more thing I must mention." Rhaegar spoke again, making people numb. "Was there more bad news? Balon Greyjoy has rebelled for the second time and enthroned himself as Balon, the 9th of his name, Lord of the Iron Islands, King of Salt and Rock, Son of the Sea Wind, Reaper Lord of Pike." Rhaegar spoke the terrible news without hesitation. There was a terribly cold look in the king's eyes. Rhaegar could imagine that the House Greyjoy rebellion would be the spark for the civil war, something he desperately tried to avoid, happened because an idiot thought he was strong enough to be king because he had a meager army of 15,000 men with 100 warships. It's too much of a coincidence for the two things to happen at the same time, especially since the monster epidemic came from the city's port. When Cadmus said this, everyone connected the dots and truly felt that it was too much of a coincidence for the two things to happen at the same time. Could Balon have used this to prevent House Targaryen and the vassals from marching towards the Trident? Raymond said with a skeptical and incredulous tone. It's unlikely, after all, if things got out of control, even the Iron Islands would be affected. Eddard said with an affirmative tone, but he himself didn't believe his words. If there was one thing Balon was, it was a careerist who would do anything for his throne. It doesn't matter at this moment, we have to find a way to deal with Duskendale. Rhaegar interrupted his vassal's reasoning and said in a calm tone. It didn't matter who was to blame at this moment, the most important thing was to prevent an army of zombies and ghouls from spreading through the Crown lands. Rhaegar looked at Cadmus and asked in a calm tone. What do you think, Lord Peverell? As soon as Rhaegar finished speaking, the lords who didn't know Cadmus looked at the young man with black hair and green eyes with surprised and confused expressions. After all, Cadmus was really young by the standards of everyone present, he didn't look like someone experienced or even a strong warrior. Although Cadmus had sold potions to the sons, brothers, or cousins of these lords, the news had not yet spread so quickly. As if seeing the lords' doubts, Rhaegar felt it was a good time to announce Cadmus's entry into the small council and spoke in a calm tone. This is Cadmus Peverell, Lord of Harrenhal and the Court Mage. He will assist the crown in matters involving magic, monsters, and my safety. Everyone's gaze changed when they heard the king's presentation. Aside from the mage part, the title of Harrenhal was simply shocking in the eyes of these people, especially the lords of the Riverlands. Everyone looked at Cadmus with angry and hostile looks. These were the lords who hoped to receive the castle of Harrenhal, but knowing that the castle already had an owner and was a complete stranger with mysterious origins made things even more complicated. These lords even ignored that Cadmus was a mage. In their eyes, the title and lands of Harrenhal were more important than anything else. Even Eddard was surprised by Rhaegar's words. He didn't expect Cadmus to go from a commoner to a noble owning one of the most important castles on the continent in less than a week. Your Grace. One of the lords of the Riverlands stood up and spoke loudly. I don't think this is appropriate. Lord Peverell is not even from Westeros, perhaps he is a barbarian from Essos. Furthermore, he has no merit to receive a castle like Harrenhal. Seeing that the first one had already stood up, the other lords quickly stood up and voiced their opposition. The first lord to stand up, seeing this, felt more confident and looked at Cadmus with an openly hostile gaze. Cadmus looked at each face and name, noting all the names in the black notebook of revenge in his mind. He was quite vengeful, especially towards those who hindered his plans. Rhaegar looked at the lords who forgot about the important matters currently happening, prioritizing their own interests with a cold gaze. What he hated most were these annoying leeches. Lord Peverell deserved the titles and castle he received. Rhaegar spoke in a calm and serious tone, but did not go into detail about the poison that was removed from his body and his mother's. If this were announced, the Faith of the Seven and the Order of Maestus would know that he has knowledge about the poison and would prepare adequately for his revenge. Although Rhaegar's words were convincing, the lords were still dissatisfied with a stranger controlling the largest castle in Westeros, even if it was just a ruin. However, faced with the king's gaze, these nobles were intimidated. Rhaegar was not a weak king, he built an army of 40,000 fully armed men and was an excellent commander. However, they decided to meet in secret to find a way to expel or even kill Cadmus. Cadmus was sensitive to murderous intentions and looked at the group of nobles with a touch of amusement in his eyes. He hated being threatened, it was one of the things he most detested, and these nobles had just dug their own graves. As for fearing them, Cadmus looked at those nobles as if they were ants. Common people had no chance of fighting a mage, especially a mage like him. He had countless ways to kill these men, whether through accidents or even diseases. Only an Imperium could make these lords die the way he wanted. Does this make me Kira? Cadmus thought with a touch of amusement appearing on his face. My king, I can deal with the zombies and ghouls, I can burn them all without any problem. Cadmus spoke in a calm and confident, even arrogant, tone. Do you think you have a dragon to burn an entire city? One of the lords spoke with disdain. Not just him, most of the people present didn't believe it. However, Cadmus laughed and replied with a provocative tone. I don't actually own a dragon, but I have something similar. Cadmus felt it was a good time to grow his reputation and that of the future House Peverell. Mitra, the black phoenix, could grow to a size similar to an adult dragon without any problem. Note, there is not much exact information about the size of an adult dragon, so I chose an exact number to make it easier. 60 meters equals 196 feet. Cadmus's words made everyone's gaze change drastically, even Rhaegar showed a look of shock and disbelief. Then, under everyone's shocked eyes, the sound of flapping wings sounded outside the castle, and a sharp, penetrating cry like that of an eagle reverberated, full of majesty and nobility. Chapter 39, The Burning of Duskendale. What is the impact of seeing a colossal black bird with red eyes perched on the wall? You don't know? Gerald Hightower can tell you. It was a truly desperate feeling, the feeling of helplessness, horror, and fear mixed in a chorus of negative emotions. The old Kingsguard knight couldn't even move in front of the colossal creature. The swordsmanship he was so proud of seemed like child's play. It was a force that the human race could never fight head-on. Gerald was not the only one, whether noble or commoner. When they looked at the gigantic bird perched on the wall of Harrenhal, they were completely terrified. If this were the age of Jaehaerys I or Viserys I, people would be used to seeing such a large creature, or rather, they would find it a bit small compared to old Rhaegar, the dragon that Queen Visenya I Targaryen rode. Rhaegar swallowed hard in front of such a large creature, but an unknown fire was awakening in his chest. At that moment, he had never wanted a dragon so much. The fascination of controlling such a large creature was a temptation that he, a Targaryen king, could almost not control. This is my companion in arms, Mitra, a black phoenix. Cadmus proudly introduced the bird with a smug expression, especially looking at the lords of the Riverlands who wanted to take his castle. She can't breathe fire like a dragon, but she can control fire magic to create a fire just as strong. Cadmus said with a laugh. The king's expression was simply funny in his eyes. Seeing Cadmus's smug and proud expression, Rhaegar had never felt such a strong urge to punch someone. Of course, he knew it was his envy speaking louder. If he had a being as great as Mitra, he would wake up smiling every morning. In front of such a large monster, who was Tywin Lannister? He could simply go to Casterly Rock and destroy the entire House Lannister army just as King Aegon I did in the battle known as the Field of Fire. Can it destroy a city like a dragon? Looking at the noble and elegant-looking bird perched on the wall, Rhaegar looked at Cadmus and asked. If so, then he would have to re-evaluate Cadmus. Yes, it is perfectly capable of destroying a city. Cadmus said in a casual tone, as if it wasn't really incredible. However, in his eyes, Mitra had more of an auxiliary role than a weapon of war. The reason for this was simple, he himself had more power than Mitra. So, he was genuinely being casual, as he himself could destroy a city even more efficiently than the Black Phoenix. Looking at the king's expression, Cadmus could imagine that he wanted a phoenix egg or to ask if it was possible to hatch a dragon with the remaining dragon eggs. If your grace wants to ask if I can make dragons be born again in Westeros, the answer is yes and no. Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. He had already cast a spell around them that prevented others from hearing their conversation. Rhaegar was happy and confused by Cadmus's words, yes and no, What was that supposed to mean? To put it very simply, it takes a special person to bring dragons back to life. Cadmus said in a calm tone. Although it didn't seem like it, Daenerys had used blood magic when she hatched the dragons. A woman who had never touched magic performed a sacrifice like old Valeria did and brought back the dragons using magic, life, and blood. Rhaegar frowned hearing Cadmus's words. He looked at the mage and asked in a calm tone. And who would that person be? Princess Daenerys. Cadmus had no reason to hide and spoke without hiding anything. The princess has an absurd amount of dormant magic inside her. By performing a blood ritual, she can get the dragons to be born. Rhaegar's face relaxed when he heard it was Daenerys. He feared it wouldn't be a Targaryen. That would be terrible. We will talk about this after resolving things in Duskendale. The court will return to King's Landing to deal with the Greyjoy rebellion. Rhaegar said in a calm tone. He needed time to get the dragon eggs hidden on Dragonstone. At the same time, he had to return to King's Landing and summon his banners to destroy the Iron Islands once and for all. Cadmus nodded and spoke. I cannot manage an entire city alone. I need soldiers to maintain order or to rescue civilians. I will send 10,000 men. Rhaegar did not refuse and spoke in a calm tone. If possible, avoid burning the entire city. Burning Duskendale was the last option, but faced with the safety of the entire kingdom, Rhaegar became determined. But do not hesitate if you see things getting out of control. I prefer to lose one city than all the crown lands. Cadmus was not surprised by Rhaegar's words. Losing one city was a much smaller price than losing all the crown lands. A fool would know which was better, and even if it was cruel to the people, the lesser evil would be better than a greater evil. I cannot guarantee that the city will remain intact, but I will not destroy it. Cadmus was confident in gathering all the monsters in one place in the city and destroying them all in one attack. Although that part of the city would be destroyed, it was better than the destruction of the entire city. I thank you on behalf of all the people of Duskendale. Rhaegar said with a genuine tone of gratitude and respect. Being a vassal does not mean being a slave. The king, although powerful, would never be anything without the lords around him. Only a foolish king thinks everyone should bow to him simply because he is a king. What will the king do with Theon Greyjoy? Cadmus didn't care about the thanks. He also had selfish reasons for facing an entire city full of zombies and ghouls. Not only would his reputation spread throughout Westeros, but he could also take the chance to create a potion against the undead. This would be of great help in the war coming from beyond the wall. Rhaegar's face turned cold at the mention of Theon Greyjoy. He looked at Cadmus with his lilac eyes and spoke in a deep tone. Since Balon doesn't care about his own son, he will receive the head of his third son to bury next to his other two dead sons. Cadmus nodded his head. Theon was essentially a hostage to prevent Balon from rebelling again. However, seeing that this didn't work, the reason for Theon to stay alive until now was non-existent. Be careful with the House Greyjoy fleet, they will attack the Reach at the most unexpected moment. Cadmus warned the king with a solemn expression. When it came to piracy, the Greyjoys were arguably the first in Westeros. My Lord of Ships, Lord Montfort Velaryon, is an experienced captain. He will guard the waters competently, as he has done in these almost 2 decades of war. Rhaegar certainly knew how skilled the Greyjoys were, but the royal fleet and the House Velaryon fleet were not something that could be faced with just 100 warships. We will see each other again in King's Landing, Cadmus. Rhaegar spoke in a calm tone. He couldn't waste any more time and had to return to King's Landing as soon as possible to control the war from the Red Keep. I will bring good news when I return. Cadmus said with a laugh that lightened the heavy atmosphere hanging in the air. With a laugh, Rhaegar placed his hand on Cadmus's shoulder and felt that Cadmus would not be a bad good brother. Cadmus separated from Rhaegar, and when he arrived in the courtyard wearing clothes suitable for riding, Mitra was already waiting for him. Her enormous body covered in feathers as black as night seemed to absorb the light around her. Her frightening red eyes stared at Cadmus with a surprisingly human and gentle look. The phoenix lowered her head and brought her face close to Cadmus, gently stroking his face with delicate and soft movements, afraid of hurting her master because of her current size. "Who is the most beautiful girl?" Cadmus stroked Mitra's neck feathers and said with a tone full of playfulness and gentleness. Which seemed a little funny, a colossal monster being petted like a domestic cat. Suddenly, Mitra's enormous red eyes moved to the side and stared at the figure who had just arrived with a piercing and sharp gaze. Cadmus turned around and was surprised to find Daenerys looking at Mitra with admiration and envy. His lips curved into an amused smile, and he greeted the princess. "What an honor for me to receive the visit of such a beautiful princess. You are so gallant, my dear lord. How many ladies have you charmed with your charisma?" Daenerys was not a shy girl and replied with an amused tone, but the happy smile on her lips showed that she liked the compliment. "You are the first. I am very selective with the women I compliment," Cadmus said with a laugh. "What is his or her name?" Trying to hide the growing happiness on her face, Daenerys changed the subject and felt she couldn't hide her happiness upon hearing the compliments from the man she was interested in. Looking at the elegant, noble, and graceful gigantic bird, Daenerys swore she had never seen such a beautiful creature. The black feathers shone with a red glow that resembled flames burning paper. "Mitra is a female of the species, practically made of fire and magic," Cadmus said with a smile as he stroked the feathers on the beautiful bird's neck. Seeing Daenerys' envious look, Cadmus took Daenerys' hand and made her touch Mitra's feathers. "So warm and soft," Daenerys murmured as she felt Mitra's warm and soft feathers. She imagined that dragons had a similar warmth. However, feeling Cadmus's heavy hand on hers, she felt her heart beat faster, and a smile appeared on her lips. "Have a good trip, Lord Peverell. I await your arrival in King's Landing." Withdrawing her hand with a certain reluctance, Daenerys looked at Cadmus and said in a soft tone before leaving with slightly hurried steps. "Does that count as a declaration?" Cadmus murmured to himself with a slightly amused tone. Chapter 40, The Burning of Duskendale. A gigantic black bird flew over city after city, leaving what seemed to be a trail of embers behind, which naturally generated chaos and fear among the people. With a length of 60 meters and a wingspan of 100 meters, the bird was simply a living nightmare in the eyes of the people. Cadmus did not care about this. He was quite happy riding Mitra. It had been a long time since he had done something like this, and when he did, it was at night. It was the first time he had ridden Mitra during the day, and he had to admit, it was a completely different experience. Looking at the beautiful bird below him, Cadmus smiled and looked at the surroundings. The speed was dizzying. Cities, forests, mountains, and rivers all seemed like a blur when looked at closely. Unlike a dragon, the phoenix was truly fast, reaching 60% of the speed of sound. Note, 204 meters per second, m/s. It seems I've arrived. Suddenly, seeing a city appearing on the horizon, Cadmus spoke in a calm tone. Duskendale. Originally home to House Darklyn, but after the events of Duskendale, where Aerys II Targaryen was held hostage by Denys Darklyn, House Darklyn was destroyed by Aerys and the hand of the king, Tywin Lannister. After being destroyed, Duskendale came to be owned by House Ricker. The current lord of Duskendale was Renfred Ricker. In the city's largest inn, called Seven Sword, a man with olive skin, black hair, and dark eyes looked from a hidden angle through the window. Seeing the street full of zombies and ghouls, the man's face became solemn. After carefully closing the window blind to avoid making a sound, the man looked at the room he was in. 5 women were present. All had similar origins to the man, olive skin and black hair. In particular, the man wore yellow noble clothes, and the other woman wore a flowing dress and jewelry on her fingers, neck, and earlobes. "Uncle, how is the situation?" Arianne asked in an extremely low tone, full of worry. If it weren't for the silence hanging in the air, it would have been difficult to even hear what she had just said. I only see zombies and ghouls everywhere, hundreds or thousands, the city has practically been taken over. Oberyn replied in a heavy and solemn tone. He could not believe that a simple stop to resupply the ship would end in the situation they were currently in. The face of Arianne, the heiress of Sons pair, instantly darkened. Not to mention them, a group of 6 people, even an army of 10,000 men would not be enough to face an entire city infested with zombies and ghouls. The longer it takes, the more ghouls and zombies will be generated, which will make the situation extremely dangerous. Not that it isn't already. Arianne said in a solemn tone. Looking at her uncle, she asked, has King's Landing received the raven? They had sent a raven to King's Landing just over a day ago. Logically, the raven should have arrived in less than 2 hours in King's Landing, as the distance between King's Landing and Duskendale was short. The king is holding a tournament in Harrenhal, it will take a while for King's Landing to contact the king, and it will take even more time for the army to be ready to march towards the city. Oberyn said in a calm tone. As a veteran general and warrior, he knew better than anyone how time-consuming it was to mobilize a large army. Logistics were terribly slow, and without logistics, the army could not be mobilized. To relieve your stress, let's visit every brothel in King's Landing, let's try every prostitute, whether woman or man. Elaria Sand, Oberyn's lover and mother of his 4 daughters, whispered sweetly in his ear while her hand firmly held his private parts. Oberyn knew she was a typical Dornish woman, as wonderfully seductive in bed as she was deadly with a dagger. You really know how to cheer a man up, my love. Oberyn spoke with a smile, leaning down to claim his lover's lips, who completely surrendered to the kiss. Wait until we get to King's Landing, we are still in this cursed city, uncle. Oberyn's niece, the Princess of Dorne, Arianne Martell, spoke, resting her head on her hand while smiling sensually. She wore almost transparent blue clothes and many glittering jewels adorned her beautiful body. Can't we just kill them all? They don't seem very strong. Obara, Oberyn's eldest bastard daughter and leader of the Sand Snakes, spoke. She was tall and had a strong body, with a voice not as delicate and strong as a man's, but a little more feminine. Don't be an idiot, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands. We will run out of strength after killing 3 or 4. Nymeria, the second eldest daughter, replied with an elegant smile on her red lips. Although she looked like a virtuous lady from a noble house, one never knew if she was hiding a dagger in her hands until it was too late. Humph. Obara snorted, looking at her sister with displeasure. Don't fight, my ears are calloused from all your fights on this trip. Tyene, the third daughter of the Red Viper, spoke with a sweet and silky voice. Small and delicate, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, her appearance was deceiving about her skill with poisons. Oberyn's third daughter was as deadly as her sisters, her delicacy perfectly concealed her mastery of poison, which she manipulated with deadly skill. However, Lord Renfred not mobilizing his own soldiers to prevent the spread of the zombies is suspicious. Rolling her eyes at the 3 women, Arianne said with a tone still confused and incredulous at the slowness with which the Lord of House Ricker was acting. The man practically watched his city being consumed and dying. Even if the city were saved later, it would be nothing more than a dead city, and the power that House Ricker had would cease to exist, just like House Darklyn. It's very likely that Renfred is dead or taken hostage. Tyene commented with a sigh. No lord would be foolish enough to watch his own city die and do nothing, so it was likely that he was dead or taken hostage by the perpetrators. A silence hung in the air with her words, this was what everyone was thinking. There was no way Renfred would stand idly by in the face of his city's destruction. Suddenly, a loud noise in the inn drastically changed the faces of the people inside the room. A man's screams could be heard downstairs. The most frightening thing was that after the man's scream, grotesque, loud, and high-pitched roars sounded from outside, followed by the desperate sound of something colliding heavily with the door. With each knock, the doors trembled and opened slightly, revealing a horrible monster smelling of decaying corpses. Shit! Oberyn cursed under his breath and quickly began to place the room's furniture against the door. He did the whole process making the least noise possible. All the women helped, there was only everyone's breathing in the room as the furniture piled up against the door. After finishing, Oberyn sighed with relief but did not relax, his spear was already in his hands. Although using a spear in a small space was disadvantageous, he was facing ghouls and zombies, beings that could infect a person with poison and diseases. 4. Suddenly, the man's scream sounded again, but this time, full of pain and despair, attracting more and more monsters drawn by the sound, who entered the inn. Oberyn knew the man was dead, screaming loudly in that place was a death sentence. Frightening everyone in the room, the furniture barricade trembled a few times, and growls sounded behind the door. Arianne could even hear the monsters breathing, the smell of decaying corpses entering the room, making everyone hold their breath in disgust. Then, a loud sound echoed and reverberated throughout the city. The sound strangely resembled a bird flapping its wings. However, this should be impossible, as there was no bird in the world that could be so large that an entire city could hear its wings flapping. The sound attracted all the zombies and ghouls, causing the creatures to go outside and look at the sky with curious and hungry expressions. A gigantic creature flew over the city, covering the city with a colossal shadow. Oberyn and Arianne opened the blinds and looked at the sky in complete shock and disbelief. Then, a male voice echoed throughout the city. "I am Cadmus Peverell, Lord of Harrenhal and Court Wizard to King Rhaegar I Targaryen. From this moment on, all survivors must remain indoors and not leave." Oberyn and Arianne looked at each other and saw each other's surprise. When did the court have a mage? However, they soon put those thoughts aside with the terrifying scene. Fiend Faer. The sound echoed like a decree from the gods.